Welcome to the Hills Invest in America Summit. The program will begin in just a minute. Please make your way to your seats. Welcome to the Hills Invest in America Summit. The program will begin now. Please take your seats and silence your cell phones.
A new Congress, and a new position on the economy and investing in America. From enterprise reporting to breaking news to live events, the Hill stays on the pulse of what's next. Welcome to the Hills Invest in America Summit.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer.
Please welcome to the stage Bill Salmon, SVP of Editorial Content at The Hill.
Good morning, everyone. I was told I didn't need to stand on the stage because I'm so tall. So anyway, good morning and welcome to the Hills Invest in America Summit. I am Bill Salmon, SVP of Editorial Content for The Hill. I'm so delighted that you're here today. You know, for the first time in almost 4 years, a majority of Americans now view the U.S. economy as strong. Kind of a surprising statistic, but that's what the latest Harvard-Harris poll shows, although the same poll shows that only 39% of Americans believe that the U.S. economy is on the right track. So it's a bit of a complicated economic picture as the president embarks on his second-term agenda and tries to enact his agenda. But, you know, as we enter what is now, I guess, the 5th month of his second term, it's pretty clear what that agenda entails, at least economically. We can start with the obvious, which is the, you know, this administration has made no secret of the fact that they envision a sort of domestic manufacturing renaissance, if you will. And to that end, we have seen tariffs, including today, we saw the steel and aluminum tariffs double. We are seeing, you know, talk of tax cuts, deregulation. We're seeing what the president calls the unleashing of American power. All of which creates a sort of a complicated mix of economic cross currents, and it makes it, frankly, a little bit tricky to figure out, you know, the title of today's conference is Invest in America, but as stakeholders in the economy, and I hope we're all, you know, obviously rooting for the U.S. economy, it does make it a little complicated as to figure out how best and how wisely to invest in America. But I think the way to figure that out is to do what we're going to do today, which is drill down on some of these economic questions. There's so many of them. We're going to get into a lot of them today. I wrote down a few just to kind of prime the conversational pump. One, how can U.S. businesses compete on the global stage while retaining their innovative edge? Two, how is the Trump administration reshaping the federal budget and the American workforce? Three, how effectively are tariffs being used as a path to incentivize domestic production and reduce reliance on foreign supply chains? And finally, four, and this is admittedly covering a lot of ground, what major changes can investors anticipate when it comes to AI, crypto, wealth management, insurance, taxes, and labor? So there's a lot to chew on there. These are big, thorny questions, but fortunately, the Hills Invest in America Summit is going to be providing some answers, hopefully, that will help us make sense of it all. So again, I want to welcome everyone in the room. I want to welcome our audience watching on our live stream. If you're following along on social media, you can use the hashtag #TheHillEconomy. I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to thank our sponsors for their support in making today's program possible. I'll start with what we call our presenting sponsors, the American Property Owners Association, BCG, as well as Philip Morris International, US. And then we also have what we call our participating sponsors, the Consumer Bankers Association and the Decision Desk Headquarters, better known as DDHQ. You may remember them as the first decision desk to have called correctly the presidential election in November. So a shout out to DDHQ. We are now going to welcome to the stage a couple of people who know a lot more about the economy than I do. One is veteran business journalist, author, board member, and startup founder Betty Liu, and she's going to be in conversation with the chairman of the Joint Economic Committee. You talk about a good guest to kick this thing off, and the congressman from the great state of Arizona, David Schweikert.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for The Hill for having me, and Congressman Schweikert, thank you so much for joining me. It's a great pleasure to be here on stage with you.
Look, you know you're in trouble when you see her, and because you've been a Bloomberg addict in a previous life, you look at her, and she's a celebrity.
Well, I appreciate that. Okay, so let's just get straight into it.
Okay.
You, in your career, you've been a fiscal budget hawk. You've warned about the federal debt. The Senate now has this big, beautiful bill in their hands, and there's so much talk about how it's going to increase the deficit by $3 to $5 trillion. You saw Elon Musk yesterday call this an abomination. Why did you support it?
You find yourself squeezed in an interesting way. Most folks do not understand or appreciate the changes that expire next year. And so like in a district like mine, my average family is over a couple $1,000s tax hike. What we did, which was different, is, and we will keep showing up and showing up and showing up, we've showed up with pieces of legislation to pay for it. We've introduced a major fixing of Medicare Advantage. Preliminary score on that is coming in at $1.84 trillion over 10. We've shown up with a talent-based immigration bill, which I'm still shocked that the business community isn't crawling all over Washington saying, we can't hit our economic growth. You're going to give us expensing on research and development, but one of the complaints you had in previous years is we didn't have enough technical talent for that research and development. We have the legislation, it's introduced, it's actually a well-designed bill, yet business once again doesn't show up and help. We've also done the forgotten funds bill, the cash. Just those bills more than offset the borrowing side of the reconciliation budget. And that's part of my fixation is there's actual policy solutions. And Washington's intellect has so degraded where, the left screams about things on Medicaid, and then you showed the charts, and it doesn't add up. And then my side, we scream about things, we make up economics, and that's not in the charts. And it's like you and I are trying to operate in a math-free environment.
Yeah, so you're saying the devil's in the details.
The devil's in the policy, actually. And forgive me for trying to snip that language, but the fact of the matter is, what's the driver of U.S. debt? I mean, it's an honest question. What are we actually up against? What do we refuse to talk about? And I would argue U.S. demographics. And you know, look, just another idiot who's in Congress, but the fact of the matter, if you take a look at our demographics, that is the driver of U.S. sovereign debt. If you go back 20 years ago, we have almost the exact same number of 18-year-olds as we did 20 years ago. But today, 20 years later, we have doubled the number of people 65 and up. So over the next decade, baseline, interest and Medicare account for almost the baseline $22 trillion of borrowing.
Yeah.
And there becomes your classic problem. If you're not going to get members of Congress on whatever your political ideology is saying, you need a revolution in the cost of delivering health care. In the past 20 years, the debate on health care has been about financing. Mm-hmm. Who gets subsidized, you know, who gets the subsidy, who pays for it. We don't have, hey, what about the revolution of what we're going to cure and the use of technology to change the price? And it becomes very lonely when you realize much of our system, like our MA reform, is just trying to realign incentives. So the insurer provider who manages the managed care model within Medicare Advantage Part C makes a profit by helping their population be healthier and therefore a lower user than scoring them as sicker all the time. We just have all this misdesign.
Yeah, and Congressman Schweiker, I think that, so what you're saying makes a lot of sense. It's been said, not in the way you're saying it, but certainly in different aspects, that we're not having the tough conversations, essentially, in Congress. We're not having those tough conversations.
See, this is why you're a professional. You say it in a few words what takes me paragraphs.
However, you know, we live in this world of compromise, and everyone speaks to their own constituents. So at the end of the day, for us looking at what Congress is doing and what is going to pass, what is going to pass? How is this going to look at the end of the day?
I will answer that part, but I need to say, you first also have to say the traditional of, well, you know, compromise, get half a loaf. You have to make the argument that the loaf is the right argument. Matter of fact, on the drive over here, we were looking at some of our data we're working on in regards to diabetes and how we make a difference there. And the debate we get in Congress is, you know, this much more money for diabetes care and maintenance, and we're working on what would be the revolution of curing and taking pre-diabetic populations and have them not move into type 2. That's a completely different loaf. And there's the problem is the intellect here in the business community, in the lobbying community, in the press community, and the brain trust that gets elected, we're having the wrong debate. And there becomes what's interesting. What comes back out of the Senate? So far, the debate we had in the House, the debate I hear in the Senate is heartbreaking. Because it's this constant, well, I have this constituency, it wants this money. Mm-hmm. I have this constituency, it wants this money. What happened to being one of the negotiators in the 2017, so I was on Ways and Means in 2017 also. And Kevin Brady, but his predecessor Paul Ryan, his predecessor Dave Camp, there was a fixation on what tax policy, you were covering parts of that, of what maximized economic growth. You know, the old conservative economic theory of broaden the base, lower the rate, deal with the arrogance of the political class that think they know what the next revolution of economic growth is. Build it so whatever the technology breakthrough is, it's able to compete and grow. In many ways, we don't have that sort of classic build a model for long-run economic growth. And that's what makes some of this so difficult, is you have the time bomb sitting over you where taxes are going up. So your capacity is pretty limited. And then over here, what are you doing? Then you have the White House's influence of, these are constituencies I made promises to. And as soon as you start to build that up, you've consumed your capacity for what would help economic expansion.
So that part's heartbreaking to you.
It's like we walked away from a lot of our basic economics classes.
So, okay, well, yeah, because of the various factors that people are considering.
It's both that, and part of it is just dealing with the current law. The current law is we have these expiring provisions in 2017, so you got to deal with your reality. We avoid the reality of U.S. demographics at the end of this, what is it, in 7, 8, 9 years, 23% of America is 65 and up. Incentives within, looking at the reality of what we are as a people. And so much of our economic design and debate is from previous decades. We're out of date in our debate.
So at the end of the day, sort of getting back to it's essentially what can everybody live with? What can you live with at the end of the day with this bill?
I'm intensely concerned that if the term premium on interest rates continues to either stay where it's at right this moment or expand, almost every bit of good we're doing with adding expensing, research and development expensing, many of these things will be consumed in the economy with higher interest rates. Think about this, from the beginning of the year till I think yesterday's, let's just use the 10, just that change in interest rate will be almost $2 trillion of just additional interest on U.S. sovereign debt. That basically means in 2035, we're borrowing almost 9% of the economy. This year, we're going to borrow about 7.3% is my model. One of my economists has it down to 7.2, but rounding errors, I guess, when it's trillions. And there's this game of, well, I need to make people happy right now, but the reality of it is, unless you're convincing the bond markets and the fact that how much borrowable money is in the world, when Germany's back in the debt markets, you see what's going on the long end of the curve in Japan. China's actually still binging on debt. We seem to be avoidance of big boy economics. And so there's my concern is there are ways to make this current reconciliation or make it public that the very next reconciliation, we're going to be right in the tail of this one with a number of our modernization of how we deliver government services. If you could tie those two together, I think you could make markets and a lot of the political class more understanding and less nervous about the debt load.
Speaking about nervousness, you've seen quite a few prominent leaders in business, Jamie Dimon, one, and we've seen some of the articles and the warnings about the federal debt and many of the projections you just mentioned here. And the markets are eventually going to speak. And they're speaking, and they're watching, and eventually they're going to speak and potentially force those tough conversations.
Yeah. Look, we're on the cusp of deciding that the world debt markets will run the country.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be brutally honest. I don't think the equity markets are as good a tell.
It's the bond market.
It's bond markets, it's debt markets. And look, when you have, Ray running around Dilio, making it, now he makes a capacity argument. How much savings is in the world to satiate sovereigns around the world binging? Okay, for any of you who are representing businesses, you've decided you're going to grow your business. So we're having this conversation of investing in America. But now you have to find capital where you get to compete with, U.S. sovereigns coming to market. So this year we borrow about $6 billion a day. Next year it looks like we'll borrow about $7 billion a day. In 9 budget years, we borrow $10 billion a day. And there becomes the classic problem. So what happens if you get regulatory policy right? You know, you crowdsource regulation, you do all these things, you modernize it, you get the tax, policies correct, so your cap rates and those things make sense. But then you go to capital markets, and capital's more expensive, and it's harder to get because we're binging. And there's the classic problem is we talk our book over here because explaining that this debt is driven by our demographics and telling our voters that is really difficult. But if you don't deal with this, how do you make this work?
So what do you say to your voters? What do you say to your constituents?
For all of you, if you've ever been to the Phoenix Scottsdale area, I'm blessed. I have one of the best educated districts in America. It's very entrepreneurial. So in many ways, even though I'm in functionally a 50-50 district, if you talk to your voters like adults and say, look, here's what we're up against, here's what's going on, it's shocking how much smarter the voters are than often the political class. And it's one of my moments of just intense frustration is, and look, look at your media career, the types of things you would do compared to, let's be honest, some of the competitors, where they're talking down, the political class talks down to people. And there really is this desire for formats like this to actually saying, I'm tired of you treating me like a child. Give us math, give us facts, we can handle it. And within that, there's actually hope. There's ways to make it work. But that window of policy options squeezes down every single day. If every day you're $6 billion plus additional in debt, your policy options just got smaller and smaller every single day.
And we just have a few more seconds speaking to an audience, so to your voters, to your constituents, here to this audience, a very sophisticated one at that. What would you want to say to them that would give them some more optimism over the next 12 months and certainty?
Yeah, you had to add the optimism part. Look, if many of you represent, you work with business concerns, think tanks, research, how do I get you to get off your backsides and start showing up? I'll do this really quickly. In 2017, we're negotiating the first time in 30-some years. And this thing doesn't stop ringing. And all of a sudden, it's Jamie Dimon on my phone. It's the head of this corporation, that corporation. The C-suite got involved in policy, and it was shocking how brutally honest they were, saying, this will help us grow, we'll invest this if you do this. I know you guys are looking at this. It really doesn't make a difference in how we design our capital stack and our investment policy. The C-suite hasn't shown up, and hasn't shown up in years. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce hasn't shown up in years. And it's because much of business, much of the chamber world became rent seekers. Show up and say, we want a subsidy for this, we want a subsidy for this, we want a special carve out for this. It's the concept of we want markets and the talent and the ideas and the passion of where technology, where opportunity takes us will grow. Instead, you wanted almost a planned industrial policy economy. And if you don't like it, I can prove it. Take a look at the things we're even debating now of Inflation Reduction, CHIPS Act, all these other things. That is planned economy. We're going with the arrogance of political class and corporate America saying, give us a subsidy and we'll do this, even though that might be second or third generation old technology, instead of showing up. And I'm shocked. So I'm number 4 in Ways and Means. I chair the Joint Economic Committee, and I've had 1 or 2 C-suite folks come visit me in the last year.
Wow.
But they'll often send me their contract lobbyists, which are wonderful people, and have no idea what they're talking. And it's also hard, because I have like 5 PhD economists that work for me. And so they'll sit down next to this young man who's, bathing is somewhat optional, but they're really, really smart. And we're trying to fix things, and they're talking the book on this little issue. If you want what a sophisticated audience like this can do, get off your backsides, get in the game, help us save the future, help us grow the economy, help us make this another American century. And then instead of just pitching your 3 sentences in the tax code, the complete lack of vision, the complete lack of morality of understanding what we're doing to your retirement, to your kids, to your grandkids. It's the micro level of rent seeking that goes on now in political discourse is almost dystopian.
It's a profound and good piece of advice.
And it's a huge change just in 7 years.
Wow. I wish we did have more time on this, but how I want to end it is, Congressman, thank you for showing up.
And now you know why I never get invited back a second time. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Who should have priority access to the U.S. market? Should it be the factory that's located in Cleveland, or should it be the factory that's located in Beijing? That's the fundamental question. The radical left corporate media, the globalist corporate media that is attempting to criticize this plan take the view that the best place to put your factory should be in Beijing or Shanghai or Bangkok or anywhere but the United States of America. The president's view is we should do everything in our power to make it so that the best place to put your factory is in an American town. So we get all the benefit. We get the economic benefit, we get the social benefit, we get the community benefit, and most importantly, we get the national security benefit of having our critical industries here in America. And that's why we're calling it Liberation Day, because he is freeing us from a global economic system that has made us subservient to foreign nations and foreign powers.
Joining us now to discuss bridging business and policy, please welcome to the stage Sylvan Lane, Business and Economy Editor at The Hill, with guests Ashley Davis, partner at S3 Group, Eli Lehrer, President of R Street Institute, and Ron Busby, CEO of U.S. Black Chambers.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to our Invest in America Summit today. I want to thank our distinguished panel of guests. We have a lot of interesting topics to, to discuss about the economy, so I figured, we'd jump right into it. Starting off with, both the theme of our event and some of the comments we just heard from Stephen Miller on the screen before. When it comes to investing in America and what companies need to do to be able to build up in America, are they better off or worse off now than they were 6 months ago? Ashley, do you want to start off with that?
Sure, thank you, and nice being with you guys as well. So I'm an optimist in regards to investing in the United States. Staying in the United States is still the best place in the world to invest, and obviously there's concerns right now with obviously the stock market, the bond market, interest rates. However, what this administration is trying to do is make it easier to invest here. So if you look at what Doug Burgum's doing or Secretary Wright's doing in regards to eliminating some of the over-regulation that has paralyzed our country in regards to building things, the oil and gas industry, even wind and solar. I mean, they're trying to really unravel some of those over-regulations on a state level and a federal level to be able to invest here better. There are definitely rooms for improvement. I'm sure we're going to talk about tariffs, but the volatility right now is probably what the biggest issue is. But again, I'm an optimist. I think this is going to even out. And today, if they really do get more trade deals, supposedly there may be, I've been hearing this for a couple weeks now, but there may be more actually announced this week. I think that helps stabilize the market as well.
I want to pick up on that comment you made about volatility. Obviously these tariffs have been imposed, increased, decreased, delayed, paused. The steel and aluminum tariffs have, been increased several times over the past couple of days. When it comes to the certainty and the stability businesses need to make these investments in these factories and bring these the supposed benefits both economically and socially to these communities, what do these tariffs and the lack of consistency with which they've been applied do in terms of the ability of companies to know what they're getting into and actually invest in that? Ashley, if you wanted to pick that up, and then I want to hear everybody's thoughts on that as well.
I think that I keep saying that I think we have until September to kind of put all this to bed, because I think right now that a lot of the companies, at least the ones that I work with or boards I sit on, they're able to predict what they need to buy, for example, in regards to the supply chain. They have done a lot of those purchases already, through the end of the year. But I think once we hit September is kind of, and I have nothing to back it up, just that's what I feel politically that he has too, meaning the president, that there has to be everything in place going into the fall for some of these companies. But I think we have a little bit more room right now. And then the political aspect of it, we can go in later, but I mean, that's a tougher one. But I mean, if you look at investments that you're doing right now, I mean, if you're investing in if you've never invested before in nuclear, I think that nuclear is around. Obviously, the AI and the data centers are around. I mean, there's big industries. The housing market is a good place to make big investments. I mean, there are some areas to invest in now in the United States that we haven't been able to invest in before. And those are surefire, those are sure bets, in my opinion. I don't know what these two are going to say, but.
Eli, do you want to pick it up from there?
So I would agree to a large extent that the U.S. is the best place to invest, and that there are some surefire bets that didn't exist before. The problem I see, however, is that the policies of this administration, through tariffs, through tax policy, through regulatory policy, generally sort of directionally point in the right direction. Less regulation, taxes that are more pro-growth. The problem is that the inconsistency with which it's been implemented, the uncertainty it's creating, is not creating the environment that's needed to invest. I talk with any number of big companies, and time after time, I hear we're not going to invest until the third quarter. We're holding back on investments. And that just isn't a way to bring about economic growth. Tremendous inconsistency in policy and tremendous uncertainty in policy that isn't a recipe for long-term growth.
Yeah, I think uncertainty is the word. The U.S. Black Chambers, we represent 380,000 Black-owned businesses across the country, but most of them are small businesses. And what you hear from a small business, and particularly a Black-owned business, is that they're going to be in a service industry or some type of consulting, and they do a lot of work with the federal government. And all of those situations right now are uncertain. And so for a Black-owned business, they're like, we need direction. And historically, it has come from the federal government and from leadership to say, here's the industries that are good to go into, here's the access to capital that is needed in order to start a business, to grow a business, and to have that sustainability. And all of those currently are facing challenges. And so as much as it is important to have the conversations about investing in America, it's got to be equally as important to talk about investing in America's Black and minority-owned businesses. Because when they do well and they have the certainty and the confidence to be able to invest back in themselves and their communities, then the rest of the country will follow suit. But just to say tariffs is going to fix the small business issues and challenges that are being faced today, I think is really unrealistic.
I wanted to, ask you a little bit more about, what are you hearing from some of your members and the member businesses in terms of how they're navigating, both the potential opportunities that are coming with the new administration and also some of the challenges that we've talked about in terms of the, certainty that they're looking for?
There was a poll research by Pew that was just created, and successfully, it shows that 1 in 5 Black Americans say that owning a business is where they feel that their sustainability and their families and communities comes from. It gives them a esteem that they're going to be able to make the decisions for themselves to be able to make sure that they have sustainability. And when that is not there for them, then the opportunities are lacking as well. So most of our businesses are saying, hey, it's not a Democratic or Republican administration that is going to make Black or minority-owned businesses successful. But when you have an administration that is pulling back the resources, pulling back the technical assistance, the capital, as well as the contracts that have historically been there to be able to create that middle class, to be able to create contract opportunities for small and diverse businesses, when that is no longer there, then our communities and our businesses are also feeling left outside as well.
Did you want to jump in?
So yes, what you're saying about the importance of federal contracting, of federal spending, of direction from the federal government is all important. Now, in some cases, I might not agree. I'm more with Congressman Schweikart on the idea that industrial policy basically isn't a good idea. But whatever you do, there has to be certainty created. And that's exactly what this administration is not doing. Time after time, they're creating uncertainty around it. Having a policy that you are cutting back federal spending enormously across the board, that would at least be a certain thing. Here, they're making certain cuts, often in places that are going to be painful, without touching the big elephants in the room: interest on the debt, Medicare and Social Security. This is a recipe for uncertainty and lack of investment, and ultimately significant problems down the road.
Can I just comment?
Yeah, of course.
Because I think everyone agrees that the government's too big, and it's really hard to do. Going back to Reagan, Clinton, my former boss, George W. Bush, I mean, like, everyone's been trying to do it, and to do it is really hard. Obviously, you can argue one way or the other about what you feel about Elon Musk, but I think you guys were alluding to, he thought he was going to be able to do this a lot easier than it truly is. But what we're doing now is absolutely not sustainable. I mean, there has to be something. And if you look at even the House trying to make some of the changes in Medicaid, I mean, they're just getting killed. I mean, if I were a Democrat, I would be doing the same thing to the House Republicans that they're doing. I mean, this is politics at the end of the day, too. But they're even making small changes is something that's politically, crucifying. And so I don't know the answer. If you have Ron Johnson and Rick Scott, so let's take the big, beautiful bill right now, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So if you have Ron Johnson, Rick Scott, obviously Rand Paul is another story because he has the debt limit issue. But they're saying exactly what you're saying. I mean, we can't, they in theory want to go back to pre-COVID budgets. Because of the amount of money that, and this is not a political statement, on both sides that needed to be spent, some I question, but in general, because of COVID. But what, do they not vote for the bill because of that? Do they raise taxes because, they can't get to pre-budget date? I mean, pre-COVID budget? I don't know the answer. It's just something that is just so difficult to do. And how do we do it? I mean, because then if we do try to do it, then you're saying your members lose. Yeah. And so it's just a really difficult question.
The difficulty is enormous, as you say, and there's no easy solution. But when the president says, we're not going to touch Medicare, we're not going to touch Social Security, we're going to continue to increase the debt, and we're going to increase defense spending, that leaves so little of the budget that's the domestic and foreign non-defense discretionary. So you can't cut that enough to even move close to fiscal responsibility.
I do think work requirements does stay in the Senate bill. So Medicaid will be cut.
Yeah, no, it's certainly, a lot of big questions about that bill in the face of the Senate. I did want to, speaking of the bill, though, I did want to ask you three, Obviously this is, in many ways kind of the foundation of President Trump's domestic policy agenda, massively important to him and Republicans moving forward. And there's, a lot in it. It's a big bill, one big, beautiful bill, as the president likes to say. I wanted to ask you through what you think the most significant parts of that bill are for businesses. There's obviously been a lot made of the personal income tax, the extension of the personal income tax cuts, but there's a lot of business provisions in there too. And Ron, I was wondering if there's anything, in that bill or just in the general policy pipeline that, you're looking at more specifically. And I want to ask everybody too. So Ron, if you want to start, and then maybe we could kind of go down the line and bring out the highlights.
Yeah, I think our issue is not as closely as tied to the bill, but really more his attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion. For us, it really helped us create a middle class for Black Americans with the safeguards that were being created to be able to have access to capital, access to contracts, access just to be able to participate. There were a lot of gains that were created and made over the last 50 to 60 years that are now being dismantled without much communication. And it doesn't feel like this administration is really trying to have a communication with America. It's making decisions very independent of what Americans feel. If you ask 70% of corporate America as well as Americans, they will say diversity, equity, inclusion is positive. It creates a good atmosphere for both corporate America as well as the federal government. And so to attack that and to dismantle that, we feel is really going to set this country back several decades without us really having a plan to move forward with the federal government. So for us, it's really about how do we make sure that minority communities still have an opportunity to be able to participate in the largest economy in the world.
I agree entirely that broad participation in the economy is of vital importance. And you can point to some provisions in the bill, a generally better tax environment for businesses, expensing, all of these things that will increase economic participation overall. But again, it's being done so quickly, so randomly, and so many of the things may have blowback effects, as Congressman Schweikert was saying earlier. You have the possibility of this exploding interest rates, which undoes all of the good. And enormous debt is, in the long term, almost certainly going to do that. The result is that, yes, some of these programs might be good. Some of them probably aren't good. But simply saying anything with a certain label on it is therefore bad is itself a problem. I have a number of problems with some of these programs. We'd probably disagree quite a lot as to which particular programs. But the idea that anything that's labeled a certain way is by definition bad is not a good way to run a government.
I agree with that, and I'll come back on that in a second, but I think the most important parts of the bill, 100%, are the individual income tax and the corporate tax. I mean, just from, I don't think anybody, no matter what political aisle you're on, that you don't want individual income tax, no matter, I know there is the tax the rich and whatever, and how you define the rich is a whole other conversation, but I think those staying in place, the corporate tax rate staying in place is probably the most crucial part of this bill. But I think what's getting in the way, which was what you're alluding to, is kind of the green tax credits that are being cut just because they were part of the Green New Deal or whatever it was called. Yeah. Because there are a lot of companies and projects that have been started, which the House kind of addressed, but in the solar and wind industry, that's very important. I also think that, nuclear is kind of becoming, as I mentioned earlier, in vogue again, so there are some tax benefits for the nuclear industry, but there is, going back to your labels, I think just some of those tax credits that were part of the Green New Deal are kind of getting unfairly treated because of where they came from.
Our street's work on the tax credits shows that overwhelmingly they're not very effective in really encouraging more investment or dealing with climate change for that matter. There are much better ways to do it, including general overall tax policy and deregulation and permitting reform. All that said, pulling them out from under people when there's already steel in the ground is not what you want to do. You can phase them out more quickly, but some of the ways it's being proposed just aren't the right ways to do it. And then again, there are some things I personally think 45Q, the carbon sequestration credit, is probably a pretty good program and probably a pretty good thing to have. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and the simple fact that it was invented by the previous administration does not necessarily make it bad. Often does, but not necessarily.
The House bill did deal a little bit with when things were shovels in the ground, how far along they were. So there is some, but I do agree, though, too, there are, I think the Senate is going to try to put some of those provisions back in the bill. You have that issue to deal with, you have the SALT issue to deal with in regards to, everyone knows what that is. So there's a few very big issues that are hanging out there before this bill passes, and whether, if the majority leader gets his way of putting it on the floor the week of the 23rd, we'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to watch to see how that bill comes together. One thing in the bill that I did want to mention a little bit, admittedly as a segue to a broader discussion about AI, is that the bill includes a provision that would basically limit the ability of individual states to have their own AI regulations, with the idea that it would eventually be preempted by a federal AI law. That provision has gotten some backlash from both sides of the aisle. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene mentioned, the notable congresswoman from Georgia mentioned yesterday that she might not have voted for the bill had she been aware that that provision was in there in the first place. What should the federal government be doing in terms of making sure that AI is, appropriately regulated to, account for safeguards, but also not limit the ability of the United States to really dominate this new technology?
So the specific proposal actually comes mostly from our street research. Our Adam Thayer was the major person behind that proposal. Obviously, as you might guess, I think it's a good one, but surprise, surprise. But with all that said, we do need federal legislation. We need a national preemptive privacy bill. We need to look carefully at tail risk for AI. It isn't that we don't need to regulate AI, we do. But a patchwork of regulations is exactly what the EU did, and it's exactly why the EU economy in 2009 and US economy were about the same size. Through overregulation, the EU literally killed the golden goose, and their economy is half the size today. There's no decline of the dollar in world trade. There's an enormous decline of the euro, and that's because primarily of overregulation. Having every state write its own rules is a recipe for disaster, is a recipe for chaos, and we need to have some sort of moratorium. This is what we did in the early years of the internet, 96 to 2001. We forbid most state regulations, and that worked really well. We should do the same thing again, and it should work, and it should allow federal action that creates a predictable, safe, and effective framework.
Yeah, I think small businesses are very concerned about what is and isn't going to take place. Our members are saying they're interested in finding out more, but they are concerned about the regulations because they want to make sure that they're not caught up in losing employees just to gain a profit, and then at the end of the day, they end up losing their business. Again, most of our businesses are going to be in the service industry, so they feel a little safer there. But when you're starting to look at the fact that college graduates or jobs are being replaced, both white collar and blue collar jobs are under attack, our small businesses are feeling like, okay, well, we have a lane that we can still adapt and participate in, but there's that uncertainty in reference to regulations of what it's going to mean to their bottom line.
For sure.
Yeah.
And Ashley, with the few seconds we have left, do you want to bring us home on that? What are your views?
Well, I completely agree with both of you, but I don't care what industry you're in, whether it's AI or whatever. You do not want 50 different states telling you how to regulate whatever you're doing. So I think the state, it's interesting, I didn't see that Marjorie Taylor Greene said that yesterday. I'm assuming it's because of some state issue within her district. But I think that you can't do business that way. And so being able to have, now I do have to caveat that by saying like the federal government's really bad at getting their act together and actually passing some of this. But there is a Senator Cruz regulation bill on AI that's broad, not too deep, it's not over-regulation, and that's probably the right way to go in regards to being able to get something passed.
Yeah, I mean, whatever the federal government does must be preemptive at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We can't have a federal regulation and then states can do whatever they want on top of it. That's the biggest recipe for disaster.
Well, I could talk about this all day, but fortunately for our guests, we have a very, very stacked panel and agenda ahead of us. Ashley, Eli, Ron, thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to continuing the conversation with all three of you afterward.
Thank you
for having us.
It is now time to hear from one of our presenting sponsors. Please welcome Colin Allen, Executive Director of American Property Owners Alliance, in conversation with Kathleen Koch, contributing editor at The Hill.
Well, good morning, everyone. Do we have any homeowners in the room? Awesome. So I'll bet you can all remember that moment when you found the perfect house, right? And your offer got accepted, you went to settlement, you left with the keys, you run over to the house, you open the door and you realize, I'm home, right? But you know, that experience is increasingly rare for so many Americans. Did you realize that the home ownership rate in the first quarter of 2025 was the lowest it's been in more than 5 years, just 65.1%. So Colin, help us understand what is going on. Why is the dream of, that American dream of home ownership, why is it so difficult to attain now?
Well, thanks, Kathleen, and it's great to be here. And as we're here at the Invest in America Summit, what better place to invest than in yourself and in your community? I think in our previous panel here, Ron Busby made the salient point that the Black Americans feel really comfortable when they're investing in small businesses, when they're starting their own businesses. What's one of the largest ways that small business owners get started? Sure. By tapping the equity in their homes, right? And I think really looking at this, we see that the American dream is still alive. And looking at some of the more recent polling, about 75% of the folks that were polled in a recent study said that they view homeownership as a continuing part of the American dream. But you kind of juxtapose that with the challenge you see almost the opposite numbers there when asked, is it a good time to buy?
Interest rates are a problem, right?
Exactly, right. And one of the things that you're looking at in challenges both of current buyers and folks who may own is what it seems like a lot of folks in the industry are starting to refer to as the four-headed monster, right? Interest rates, inventory, insurance, and inflation. Right, so really looking at these, and these are some of the key reasons why the American Property Owners Alliance was founded, to advocate for homeowners and for home buyers on some of these issues.
No, so those are real hurdles, and there's not much that someone looking for a home can do about them. But I understand that there are also some myths out there that are preventing people from buying homes. So talk to us about those.
Exactly. And maybe this is a question for the audience as well, is how many folks in the room think that you must have 20% down to buy a home? Well, this is good. I think this is a good informed audience here. We've got a few, but this is really one of the things that we see as an opportunity in that home buying space, right, is debunking some of these myths. You got a lot of folks out there who see and believe that you have to come in with 20% down, and this can be really, I think really overwhelming for folks, right? If you look at what might be a moderately priced home in $150,000 to $250,000 range, if you've got somebody who's a first-time buyer and thinks that they've got to come to the table with $30,000 to $50,000 plus closing costs, it can really be overwhelming, right?
Or sometimes they think they have to come with cash for the entire, cost of the home because so many people are showing up, right? Full payment down.
Exactly, and I mean, and you're competing with some investors and cash buyers in some systems, right? So maybe you do need that, and maybe you're looking at that competition in the market that's going to drive some of those myths as well. So I think really kind of getting out, some of the things that we do is get out into the community and try to provide people with information and the insights that they would need to debunk those myths. Right? We've gone around and done community events around the country. We started off this year in Memphis, Tennessee. Cool. We're looking to go to Chicago, Detroit, and Houston later this year as well. So I think really kind of getting out and talking to people on the ground about what makes sense and how to work through some of these issues.
Well, let's talk about, those solutions. So how do we expand access to home ownership and really, unlock that for more people?
Exactly. No, and that's, I think, really unlocking is what we're looking to do. And we look at that both in terms of some of the challenges for current owners, right? We're actively working in the tax bill here and looking at the issues around state and local taxes, right? Otherwise known as the SALT deduction. Got a great provision in the House that would increase that deduction from $10,000 to $40,000. This is something that would really cover the significant amount of property taxes that owners across the country would face. When we're looking at also looking at the issues surrounding increasing insurance costs. This is something that's also come up. But then on the inventory side, looking at policies that we could advance that would also increase the number of houses that are out there. The Neighborhood Homes Investment Act is a bill that's out that would allow for revitalization of kind of rundown or vacant properties. Provides a tax credit that would do that. It's a common sense solution that a lot of people see and think, hey, I could get behind that. On the other side, the Revitalizing Main Streets Act is another one where we look at commercial to residential conversions, right? You go out and you talk to the public and they see vacant office buildings in their communities and they say, hey, here we are. This seems like a 90% issue, right? If we could turn that into housing, it would make a ton of sense.
And this is not happening quite a bit in D.C., right?
It is. Actually, D.C. has been a leader. I think Mayor Bowser's been out there in kind of pushing some of these as you're seeing the changes here in town, right? Where people are working from home more, and there's been some federal kind of changes in where people work and how they commute.
Now, I don't want to ask you to look into a crystal ball, but of all those solutions that you just mentioned, which is closest to becoming a reality?
So I think on that legislative side, that Neighborhood Homes Investment Act is a very, very common sense issue that's got a number of co-sponsors in the House and Senate. It's not included in the current reconciliation bill, but I think it's one of those things that once we get past a lot of what's going on now, that it would be an easy lift for Congress and would provide about 500,000 homes over the next 10 years back on the market and into the ownership of folks who would like to become homeowners.
I'm wondering about new home owners, because it's interesting. I was looking up some statistics. Now the age of your average new homeowner is higher than it's ever been before, 38 years old, and they make up a smaller percentage of those buying homes right now than ever before, only 25%. Is there anything in the mix of what you mentioned or something on the horizon that would really help them?
So I think with that, and that kind of gets back to the education piece of it, right, is letting folks know that, in addition to your kind of conventional loan products, you could do a number of things, right? Are you a veteran? You could get in through the Veterans Home Loan Assistance Program that you can get in for no money down. If you live in a rural area, the USDA offers a program that is a low down payment as well. In most of the country, you have access to FHA, and then as well as loan products from all your lenders and mortgage insurance. So really, I think letting people know that you've got a whole lot of options out here, and it's not necessarily contingent on bringing a suitcase full of cash to the table.
So how much do you think homeowners, when you go around the country, you're having these events, how surprised are they by this information you're sharing? When you just told me USDA can help you get into a home, I'd never heard that before.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, no, so this is, I think it's really great to get out and be in the community with folks who are either looking to protect their investment if they're already a homeowner, or to kind of get into that and realize their American dream. So it's good to see, you can really see, I think, a lot of the lights kind of come on when you're out talking to people in the community and saying, here's the deal, right? Like you've got options. There's not a one size fits all approach here, and we're able to link them with folks like credit counselors, with realtors, with lenders. It's been great. I really think we're out there and kind of opening doors and unlocking opportunity for Americans across the country.
And how does that feel? Because you're bringing them hope.
It feels really good, right? There's a reason I do this, and it's because I believe in home ownership, and I think this is it's something that's very important, as we were talking, to investment and opportunity in the United States.
Well, Colin Allen, Executive Director of American Property Owners Alliance, thank you so much for the great discussion.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thanks for what you do. Appreciate it.
The administration continues to gut Social Security right in front of our very eyes. Instead of working to make sure seniors get their hard-earned benefits, Trump must indulge in laying off more than 7,000 Social Security workers.
When any business person comes in and wants to make some changes, they look at the whole picture and they do it in a careful, thoughtful way. That is not what this is.
There's a reason that nearly 90% of Americans agree that Social Security should remain a priority for the nation, no matter the state of budget deficits. That includes 70% of Democrats, 86% of Republicans, and 88% of independents.
We just heard from Democrats worried about the state of Social Security. Joining us now to discuss financial security for retirees, please welcome Tashonda Brown Duckett, CEO of TIAA, in conversation with Betty Liu.
Hi, Tashonda. So great to have you.
Great to be here.
And I know this is a topic, obviously, given your role, that you feel very passionate about, which is Americans needing to be prepared for retirement. And I think I'd like to just remind everyone, and you know this so well, but the idea of saving for retirement is still a relatively new concept here in the U.S. Less than 50-something years old. But if you look at recent surveys, time and again, Americans feel like they're not saving enough, and that we're facing a retirement crisis. So why are we getting to this point?
Well, great. Maybe it's always important to provide context, and I love to frame it in numbers. Today, we currently have a $4 trillion retirement savings gap. We also know that every day, 11,000 people are reaching retirement age. We know that 40% of all Americans run the risk of running out of money. And so when you think about that backdrop, and also acknowledging that women retire with 30% less, we know that number is even more pronounced for people of color. So when we talk about a crisis, it is a crisis. And the reason also is that people are living longer. And so when you think about that liability burden, it's shifting to the daughter, to the son, and to the broader family. So there are three ways in which we think about the challenge and then what is the job to be done. So first, we have an access gap. We know that 57 million Americans do not have access to a retirement plan that work in the private sector. And that's primarily small business owners with employees of less than 10. And so there's an opportunity to make sure that we can have policy in place to make it easier for small business owners to provide retirement plans for their employees. Secondly, we have a savings gap, and you hit on this. We are not saving enough. And so the job to be done is to make sure that we can design plans, for example, like auto enrollment. When you get your first job, which is what I did when I graduated from college, I maxed out because whatever I made on Monday was more than what I made on Friday. And so being able to auto enroll so that everyone has the ability to get started early. They can choose to opt out, but then re-enroll them the next year because maybe they had a moment in life that should not be permanent if they do not remind themselves to enroll. So auto enrollment, but also auto escalation. Because many times when you start contributing to your retirement plan, you may not be able to take the full max. But if we know that we're not saving enough, I think that we can have policy in place in employers to be able to incrementally auto-escalate. Again, you can take it back down, but then auto-escalate you up to that max so that over time you are accumulating enough savings. And then lastly, we have a guarantee gap. We know that in the 70s, 70+% of Americans had a defined benefit, a pension. That number is now less than 12%. Social Security was never designed to provide full replacement. And so when you're on a backdrop of not having guaranteed income, there is an opportunity to make sure that within your retirement plan, you can have an in-plan annuity insurance to complement your stocks and your bonds so that there is money that you will not outlive, so that there's that guaranteed paycheck to complement Social Security in your broader portfolio performance. So in effect, I think we have a real problem. We have a real opportunity to work together in both private and public sector to address the access gap, 57 million Americans, to address the savings gap. How do we make it easier for people to save and to increase their contribution over time? And we have a guaranteed gap. How do we design plans like an in-plan annuity that can be the closest thing to a defined benefit plan that can address longevity risk, give you comparable performance to bonds during accumulation, and ensure that you can have a paycheck? The bottom line when it comes to retirement is income has to be the outcome. And that has to be the focus that we continue to anchor on.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because I think a lot of that conversation is around the savings and the wealth accumulation, but not so much on, don't forget, you need to have that guaranteed income. Correct. Because you don't know how long you're going to live. And hopefully you'll live a long time.
And people are living longer. So yes, longevity risk is a real risk.
And you mentioned the demographics. We had Congressman Schweikert on earlier this morning who was speaking about the same thing. There's a demographic change that's happening that's enormous that we may not all be prepared for. And I'm curious, he also mentioned, business leaders need to show up. And now we know you show up in Washington and you talk to many of these congressional leaders. What do you need from them? What do you need from Congress to do on the policy front to help close that gap and help Americans save more for retirement?
Well, I think it's one, acknowledging that it truly takes a partnership between the private and public sector. And so you're right, we have to continue to engage. What I am excited and encouraged about is that the retirement crisis is not a red state, blue state. It's not a Republican, Democrat, independent. It is all of us. And the reality is, if I polled this room and said how many of us are worried about retirement or how many of us are taking care of our parents or loved ones now within our own income, there's a real issue. And so the good news is that this is a bipartisan issue and something that we have seen progress being made with Secure Act 1.0, 2.0, and now some additional good policies that are on the agenda that's in with Senator Kaine and Senator Cassidy to make it easier. And so what are some of the policies that I am encouraged about and hope that we can get done? One, there's the help the young generation save for retirement, reducing the age to 18. 18, which is again by Senator Cassidy and Senator Kaine, so that younger people can get started with their retirement benefits earlier. There is the re-enrollment opportunity, so that at least every 3 years, if not every year, if someone opted out, they can get auto-enrolled back in. That is a really important piece. Additional policy that I think is really important is to make sure that within the retirement plan, you can provide the opportunity not just for liquid annuities, but also illiquid, similar to a defined benefit plan, so that you can have that longer term opportunity to get higher returns because you can invest longer without the liquidity concern. And if the goal is for retirement, some part of that allocation, I believe, can be illiquid so that you can get the opportunity to earn more during the accumulation for it to be able to provide you more income. And so that is good policy in providing the safe harbor. And then lastly, I think there's the opportunity to make sure that there's just more lifetime income solutions within your retirement design plan, making sure that, plan sponsors can have the safe harbor to be able to provide more options for participants to be able to have confidence that as they are taking advantage of their workplace retirement plan, it can give them confidence that they can have income that they cannot outlive. So I am encouraged about the bipartisan support. I think it requires us to continue to engage, which we are. And I think that there's more opportunity for us to really design plans that can work for everyday Americans and give them the confidence that after their years of working, they can take care of their basic needs.
You mentioned earlier about encouraging young people, to start thinking about retirement, start saving for retirement, as young as 18. I'm the mother of two 20-year-old boys,
right.
And me getting them to think about retirement is like the most important.
Bring them to my house.
I think I will. I'll take you up on that invitation. It is difficult because they're dealing with so much else. And, we just had a panel here talking about housing affordability, that they're thinking about how am I even going to afford a house, get a job, all of these things. So how do you get young people to think about retirement?
Well, what I'm encouraged about, and I have some kids too, from 9 to 19, but they are curious. I think that we think that young people don't care about long-term things. They care about the environment. They care about what's happening around the world. They want to contribute to society. And so I think it's upon us to reframe the frame. If you ask young people what are their hopes and their dreams, they will tell you they want to help their family. I want to help mom have a better outcome. I want to buy her a house. I want to do this. They do not want to transfer the stress to that next generation. And so what do I say to young people? There's a word that I think every young person should know, and it's called compounding. Whether you want a house, whether you want to start your own business, whether you want to have that rainy day fund, whether you want to have confidence in having a secure retirement, compounding addresses all of that. And what that means is that we have to start early. You cannot time the market, but you need to spend time in the market. And if we are helping our young people understand, which they want to understand about investing, that if you are investing over time, you're investing for that moment to buy a home, you're investing for that moment, to have your children or whatever your goals and objectives are. And the benefit about talking about retirement, there are 3 things that I talk to young people about. One is when you get your first job, take advantage of your benefit plan. If you do not max out, again, it's more money than you made the day before, then you are telling that employer you can have some of that benefit money back. I don't need it. So max out, that is a simple message. I don't think any young adult would say, I'm good. They're going to want to max out if they understand they're leaving money on the table. Secondly, the tax benefit in retirement. And so what that simply means for young people is that dollar that you are investing towards your retirement, which is part of your life plan eventually, it's working harder for you because you're getting the tax benefit. And then lastly, the power of compounding. And so I think it's about us meeting young people where they are. I think it's about asking first the question about their hopes and their dreams and making sure that they can have confidence that they can have a secure future. And then I think it's about making sure we know they want to buy a home, they want to own their own business, they want to do all these things, getting started with investing earlier taking advantage of tax treatment so that that dollar is working harder for you, and making sure you're not leaving money on the table with your workplace benefit plan. If we can bring that story together, I'm sure your sons will make sure they max out on their first job. And I think they'll understand the power of compounding, because you talk about that a lot. And I think over time, people do want to have a secure retirement. They want to be able to have that next chapter in life. And I think we have to talk to the young people now so that they can get the power of compounding over time.
Yeah, I think I'll have to take this snippet here and make sure they see that. And I want to switch gears a little bit from the retirement challenge just to you leading this large financial services organization, and there's so much talk about, including what we heard in an earlier panel about technology and AI and leaders leveraging the latest technology, because they know that it's going to be disruptive, and it is disruptive, but also there's also the flip side of that, which are the ways to accelerate your business. So how are you leveraging technology at TIAA?
Yeah, I'm excited about technology. I'm excited about AI, agentic AI, and let me tell you why. I always say AI is not going to necessarily take the jobs. It's the lack of embracing that technology that will make you less marketable. And so the way in which we are using AI, I think has been a journey of how we've used technology. So whether it's in our call centers and using AI to make sure we can anticipate participants' needs and questions, being able to provide insight at the fingertips of our employees. With Naveen and Asset Management, investing in AI, when you think about reports, we look at all public companies and being able to look at all the earnings and all the research and being able to bring that together in a way that it can prove the value of which our analysts can provide information back to our clients, and in the speed that they could do it. I think there's efficiencies that can be gained. I think there's client experience that can be gained. I think the most important thing is to be thoughtful about the investment. I think it's understanding what are the use cases. But I also think as a leader, in addition to talking about the technology, it has to go hand in hand with the culture mindset shift. We have to equally spend a lot of time talking to our employees, making sure that we can get them comfortable with using the tools, understanding the value so that they're not afraid of it. I think the more our associates are using the tools, the more excited they are about the problems that they can solve, about the way that it can support them. And I do think that, yes, there will be disruption in certain jobs, but I also think there will be new jobs also being created. And so making sure that we have the right work skills in place, using AI to identify the skill sets of our employees, to help them understand opportunities, taking them on this journey, I am very excited about. I think ultimately it would allow us to be more efficient, which for us at TIAA allows us to take that and give it right back to our participants to help them have a more dignified retirement. So I do think we have to embrace AI. We are embracing AI, but we're also equally embracing the culture journey that we have to go on to make sure that our people can be just as excited as we are in terms of what the opportunities can present themselves, and making sure that they're prepared for the workplace shift in a way that can give them confidence that they can still have a meaningful career, at our company.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. It's both a tactical and cultural shift.
That's right.
When it talks about integrating, when you talk about integrating these newer technologies that are coming at us at a very fast pace these days. Just before we go, give us the picture on the retirement landscape in 15 years. What does it look like, Tashonda?
We need to get started to do more today. I think if I take my optimistic hat, we need to continue to work both in public and private sector as we think about Social Security. We need to ensure that we are designing retirement plans where income is the outcome, where people are not in a position to drain what's supposed to be for retirement. And then by the time they're getting close to retiring, they realize they don't have enough. We can design plans that can give people confidence that they can have income. So when I look forward, my hope is that we will continue to do the work to make it easier for employers to deploy the plans, that we address the 57 million Americans that do not have access to a workplace plan by working closely with small business owners. I think technology can be an unlock and an accelerator on what this can mean. And my hope is that this next generation will be able to invest in a more diversified way so that they are able to have better earnings. And over time, we are addressing this retirement crisis. It's not going to happen overnight. It will take intentional partnership and engagement, and also educating everyday Americans on what they can do today to change the outcome of tomorrow. But if we don't put a full court press on this, we will continue to transfer the burden on families. And that burden on families in an intergenerational time where more people are living longer, that dollar that a family has in their budget is going to have to then be allocated to not just mom, but grandmother, in addition to their children. So we have to do the work. I remain optimistic, given that this is a bipartisan issue, given that there's a lot more conversation about it, given that there's technology that can bring more awareness and a lot more investment solutions that can generate higher returns during accumulation, but confidence that income can be the outcome. So optimistic, but I'm only optimistic to the extent that we're all willing to do the work.
Right, that there's action today.
There has to be action today.
Tashonda, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It is now time to hear from one of our presenting sponsors. Please welcome Kathleen Koch back to the stage, along with Sharon Marcel, North American Chair, Managing Director, and Senior Partner at BCG.
She navigated the stairs. Great job. So, good morning again, everyone. So, Sharon, I understand, BCG is a $13 billion global consulting firm, and you work with leaders in business and society on their challenges and opportunities. So, what are you hearing right now when you talk to CEOs around the world? What are they telling you?
Yeah, well, I have the great privilege of speaking to a lot of CEOs around the world and in North America, and also others in the C-suite. And there's a lot of topics that are top of mind. But in terms of what they can control and what they're really working on, I think two really come to the fore. A lot of preparation around talent and their talent strategy going forward. And then the second, and the previous speaker was talking about this, is AI. I mean, it is a topic in every executive conversation. But maybe I'll start with talent. So if you look at the talent environment today, there are gaps in key skills. So if you think about healthcare, if you think about trade, there's already gaps that we see in terms of the economy. If you project forward and you look at the changes that are happening, everything from demographics to potential reshoring, to potential changes in immigration, and then thinking about some of the industries that may be coming back, like the semiconductor industry, for example, we are going to need to upskill our talent to be better at that. BCG did a piece of research very recently looking at the healthcare industry. One of the findings there was that by 2030, it's not that far away, there's going to be a 1 million job gap in terms of the number of providers that we need and the number we will have. So that's one example. Now,
what's responsible for that, out of curiosity? I mean, that's a huge gap.
Well, part of that is demographics.
Okay.
Part of that is immigration. So if you put those two things together in terms of the aging of our workforce and our
aging of America,
and then you actually layer in some of the immigration data and some assumptions around immigration, which are never perfect, it really creates that gap. So, at BCG, we're working to help our clients upskill. We have this at-scale platform. It's called BCG U, which is both sort of classroom teaching, but also importantly, catch-as-catch-can teaching. So a very large platform of things that we can train on, and including AI. Because one of the changes, as again the previous speaker was talking about, was AI and how that's going to change the work that we're doing. So today, BCG is working with one of the largest consumer goods companies in the world, actually preeminent, super skilled company, upskilling their folks, thousands of them, on AI. We're also working with one of the largest and best tech companies, believe it or not, upskilling them on AI, but really thinking about a specific part of that, which is kind of their risk function and thinking about compliance. So this next decade is going to be enormous in terms of talent and changes in talent and the need to really lean in to upskilling. The second topic, AI. Let me just touch on that for a second. So 2 years ago, ton of conversations at the board level on AI. It was at this level.
Oh, sure. It was the thing that everyone was talking about.
Everyone was talking about. So interesting, but people didn't. No one really got it. Very few in business really got it. Okay, fast forward a year, much better understanding. Now fast forward 2 years, which is where we are now. My observation is that it is much better understood. That most of the C-suite is becoming quite sophisticated with respect to AI and really thinking about how can AI drive competitive advantage in my industry.
What advice are you giving companies on AI, on other big issues? And I understand when it comes to AI, you recently completed a really fascinating survey that I was enjoying digging into online, looking at the mood of executives all around the world when it comes to AI.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the survey, let me touch on that. So we surveyed 2,000 CEOs. That's not easy to get data from 2,000 CEOs. Almost all had purchased a technology to enable their employees to use AI, but only 30% felt that their employees were truly enabled. So one piece of advice is upskilling, because you can have the technology, you can have the algorithms, but if you don't actually determine where you're going to employ the AI at scale, you will not get a return. We call it the 10-20-70. It's a little catchy. 10% is a technology. It's an important choice, but there's a lot of commonality among the technologies, so choose a technology that works for your business. 20% is the algorithms, okay? So how do you enable your processes, which are going to be distinct to your company? But 70% is how do you upskill your people to work in a different way, 10-20-70. So that's a big piece. And then I'll just mention one more. The pace of change of this technology is faster than I've seen in my 30-year career. And I'm going to use the word agentic was used. So agentic AI, which honestly many people are talking about, embracing agentic AI. Our studies.
You want to explain that to everyone?
Sure. I mean, agentic AI is you basically, I'm going to use the word co-pilot, not in a, but you basically have a co-pilot who's working with you to enable you. Think of an assistant. And it could be in any function. It could be in the HR function. It could be in the real estate function. And these agents actually help you do your work more efficiently, and in some cases can enable 2 to 3 times productivity increases. But I want to share with you that while everyone is talking about it, if you analyze investor calls, what you'll find is it's only mentioned 1% of the time. So we analyze every quarter, all the investor calls, we analyze 6,000. 1% of the time, we're picking up on agentic AI. And why is that? Because while it's being talked about and experimented with, it's actually not been translated into real value yet. So I say it's the next wave, but you're going to have to run fast in terms of your technology understanding just to keep up and invest in your talent and continue to push on AI because it's constantly changing, and to get competitive advantage, you have to be ahead.
Now, I know there's still a fear factor. There are workers who still worry about being replaced by AI.
Yeah.
BCG you're a professional services company. I mean, does that ever concern you that you could be replaced by Gen AI?
So it's a real question, right? It's a real question for our economy and our society. The way we see it at BCG is we've leaned in to AI. Our supplier would say we are the biggest user of their services worldwide. I don't want to mention the supplier, but so we have really leaned in a big way. We did a recent employee survey, and 80% of our people are using AI on a weekly basis. 74%.
That's huge.
Yeah. 74% say it's actually making their work more joyful. 78% that say it's improving our delivery to clients. So that now, if you think about that, what does it all mean? It all means we can write our documents faster, we can do our analyses faster. So that should give us more time to enable our clients, spend time with our clients, spend time on the change, which actually delivers the results. Our analysis—
Be creative, right?
Be creative. Our analysis doesn't change a company. Our slides don't change a company. But if we can do less of that and more of spending time with our clients and really driving the change, it will be powerful.
When you look out over the next year, what are you most excited about?
Well, you can tell I'm excited about AI. I do think it's the next year. I think we'll move faster in terms of change. And so, for example, AI in concept is interesting, in business processes is interesting at my client. But now I'm really starting to use it on a daily basis and really leaning into the improvements, whether it's preparing for a meeting and, with a person I don't know at a company I'm not familiar with. Used to have to call a team and get it. And there's so much you can do just to come up the learning curve quickly. And so I think this next year is going to be a really fun year.
So do you have your own agent that you're using?
I do have my own agent, yeah. Cool. I do. So it's super exciting.
Yeah. And so you think, is there anything that concerns you as you look ahead?
Yeah, I think, I think as with any technology, there need to be guidelines, there need to be rules of the road. It can be used in a destructive way. And so we need to be vigilant in terms of how each and every company is self-monitoring. It's very hard to have regulation that monitors everyone. So on the corporate side, we have to be very vigilant in terms of how we're utilizing it. And to the extent there are jobs that are eliminated, we need to be very concrete in terms of how we reskill those people to go on to do other important things.
All right. Sharon Marceau, North America head of Boston Consulting Group. Thank you so much. Really fascinating.
Great to be here.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Role here is to just let you know, first of all, thank you so much this morning. You guys have been so great giving us your attention here on stage. We've had some great speakers. I'm going to send you off on a coffee break, a 10-minute coffee break. When we get back, we'll have the former IRS Commissioner, Danny Werfel, and Nicole Elam, the CEO of the National Bankers Association. So you'll have some time, go to the restroom, grab some more coffee, come back at around 10:40. So thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you for joining our program so far. We're now in our virtual kind of in-between time to rehash some of what we've learned so far. I'm here with Sylvan Lane, our business editor at The Hill. I'm Alexandra Chano. I cover the White House for The Hill. So we wanted to go over some of the things we've been hearing so far. One of your first panels focused a lot about the uncertainty in the business community right now during the Trump administration. Can you unpack some of what you were hearing of the big concerns amongst business leaders right now?
Sure, Alex. So, one of the big things that we focused on in the first panel, talking with some folks who know both Wall Street and Washington really well, is kind of the gap in between what the Trump administration wants to do in terms of delivering on what the president has called, the new golden age of America, bringing these factories back, bringing a lot of manufacturing jobs back, and how the administration is going about trying to do that. One thing we focused on is the fact that these tariffs, while they're supposed to be, giving businesses the opportunity to bring these jobs back to the U.S. and invest, it becomes harder to invest in America when, the tariffs are changing, sometimes by the week or even the day, when, there's trade deals that are potentially in the works. They get announced. Sometimes they don't necessarily get abided by, depending on who you ask. So one of the big things that, business experts were talking about is the need for certainty for these businesses as they look forward into, what will hopefully be a delivering on some of these promises.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of, Wall Street obviously notices every time, as you know very well, the president announces a new tariff hike on a certain trading partner or then decides to back off of those. And it's so much back and forth. You covered the Trump first term really closely. Does this feel like even a more uncertain environment? I mean, we saw tariffs then, but this is on a whole nother scale.
Absolutely. I think the speed with which the administration has put forward its trade policy, the number of changes and adjustments that are happening, it's definitely a lot more intense this time around than last time. And I think that reflects a difference in the approach too. Last time, in the first Trump administration, we had, U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer, who is, a trade attorney, all about like the very deliberate process. You put forward the reports, you build a justification there, and then eventually you get the tariffs. But, as you know from your own coverage of the first Trump administration, there were a lot of people within the president's orbit who were frustrated by the pace of that. Yeah. This time around, we've seen the president come out a lot stronger and more independently with all those things. And I think you've seen a larger reaction across the economy and financial markets because of that.
Yeah. No, definitely. Another big topic, aside from tariffs, is AI. I feel like every corner is touching on how to handle AI, what's the impact going to be. What did you hear about AI and how it relates to the business community, what the impact could be on the job market, hiring, and just the day-to-day business?
The big thing that we've heard is that, AI is here. AI is already changing things, and it's really a big question for Washington as to how they handle it. There's clearly a lot of opportunity with AI and the efficiencies and some of the things it could bring, but there's a lot of people out there in the country who they don't want to be saying I had a cool job that I loved and then a robot took it away. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the focus and going forward too is about how those new AI jobs are going to affect the economy and how Washington can try to balance regulation and innovation as they look at what to do.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and I think something we're all kind of trying to navigate what the future of all of this looks like. Even the administration themselves trying to figure out how they work with AI. Looking ahead, we have a big jobs report number coming out for the May report. This morning we saw some ADP numbers coming out. How important, can you explain what some of these numbers, what you're looking forward to, what some economists are expecting, but also how important is all of this to just the overall decision making in Washington when we see these big reports coming out monthly?
No, I'm glad you mentioned that because we have a panel of economists coming up, and we're going to dive a lot into that in the next stage of the program. So everybody at home, please stick around for that. It's going to be a great conversation. In terms of what you could expect from it, the job market has actually been pretty solid for the past few years. Right after the coronavirus pandemic really started to kind of unwind, we saw this big recovery in the job market, but that has not lifted up the spirits and the well-being of the American people in a lot of ways that people have expected. So going forward, the importance of the jobs report, it's not only a sign of how well the U.S. economy is handling some of these new challenges, and some of the challenges created both in terms of changes in policy and just the way that the economy evolves over time. But, how is the Federal Reserve going to handle that going forward? Yeah. Fed Chair Powell, he's said that he's pretty comfortable with the way the economy looks right now. The job market is in good shape. Inflation is getting lower, so they don't really want to mess around too much with interest rates with so much uncertainty out there. The president, however, as you saw and reported on this morning, has been very adamant that he wants lower interest rates from the Federal Reserve to be more in line with the interest rates of economies abroad, where, they may not be honestly doing as well as we are in America. So there's a bit of a divide over that. And, I think a big question is going to be if we get a significantly better or significantly worse than expected jobs report, how is the Fed going to respond to that? Is that going to change, interest rates at all, or their policy handling of that?
Yeah, and it was interesting, the ADP numbers today were not as strong as I think some had predicted or hoped, and I think it was the slowest rate in job growth since March 2023, so it's been a couple years of good growth until we saw that today, and the president leaned into those numbers to say that Chair Powell has to lower interest rates. So it's also interesting, the two of them met at the White House just last week, and that was obviously a big topic of discussion of his pressure on him to lower these interest rates. Do you think the job numbers, do you expect a True Social post, or, around 9 a.m. tomorrow after these job numbers come out? And do you think some of these business leaders would agree with Trump, though, that some of these interest rates need to go down? Or do you think they're also along the same lines of there's so much uncertainty right now, let's wait and see what happens with the economy?
I think that's a great question. I think there are certainly some industries that, might be ready for lower interest rates, especially if you're concerned about one of the big reasons why, President Trump historically has been very adamant about, wanting lower interest rates is that, we can't forget, this is somebody who spent decades in the real estate business and construction business. Yeah. High rates aren't great for that. Low rates are good for that. So, I think the president is looking at it in some ways in the views of, his usual approach. He talks a lot about his business experience. But, the reality of the situation is that there's a lot of uncertainty given, where interest rates are going, especially how it relates to the debt, as well. So it's kind of a tough call in many ways. I think businesses, are looking just generally for greater certainty when it comes to all of these things, and might be more inclined toward Powell's view of, we need to figure out what's going on with trade. Once we figure out what's going on with trade, then we might have clear answers to go there.
Yeah. Well, a lot of interesting conversations coming up, whether about tariffs, the job market, AI, the future of how tech relates to the business sector. And we're excited about your next panels and to hear what some of these leaders have to say. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for sticking around at home during our break.
Thanks, Alex.
Nice.
The Hills Invest in America Summit will begin again in 2 minutes. Please take your seats.
We love dreams. Dreams can be small, like saving enough for a family vacation, or big, like opening a new business. Banks support your dreams because we believe in you. We believe everyone should have access to financial services so that you can choose products that best meet your unique needs. We believe everyone should have a healthy financial foundation where you and your family have an opportunity to grow. We believe everyone benefits in a competitive and well-regulated financial services industry where banks and non-banks should compete for your business without cutting corners. Our vision for America is a better tomorrow for you, for your neighbor, for all of us. Banks serve you, and banks help you achieve your goals. Learn more by visiting ourvisionforamerica.com.
We have really, really strong job numbers. We've got inflation heading down towards the Fed's target, and this is before the tax cuts come in. I think that one of the things we talk about taking uncertainties off the table, the Council of Economic Advisors has estimated that if the House hadn't passed the tax bill, that it would have been the biggest tax hike in American history, and that big tax hike, the biggest tax hike in American history, would have cut about 4% off of GDP growth. We'd have had a recession. And so if you look at the CBO's own estimate, if you have a recession, that reduces revenue by about 1.5 times the percent change. The elasticity is 1.5. So it's a 6% decline in revenue. That's maybe about $300 billion decline in revenue just this year with a recession. But it didn't happen despite no Democrat voting for it because the House passed that bill. I think markets were worried. Are they going to not pass the bill? And now it looks like I think that markets are starting to want to price that in because the Senate's making a great deal of progress. The gap between the Senate and the House is not enormous.
Welcome back to the Hills Invest in America Summit. Thank you to Consumer Bankers Association for their support of today's program. Now, please welcome back Sylvan Lane, Business and Economy Editor at The Hill. He's joined by Kate Bond, Chief Economist at the Institute for Women's Policy Research, Adam Hirsch, Senior Economist with the Economic Policy Institute, and Michael Clemens, Non-Resident Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics and Economics Professor at George Mason University.
Thank you, everybody here and at home, for watching our event today. And thank you to our three distinguished guests for what I'm sure is going to be a really interesting conversation about the economy, where we're at, and hopefully where we're going. So I kind of wanted to start off somewhat generally. President Trump has talked a lot about bringing the U.S. back to this, quote, golden age of America. And when it comes to what the economy looks like in the golden age of America, I wanted to ask, what is, the golden age of America in terms of what the economy looks like? And Kate, if you want to start us off, and maybe we could go down the line and hear everybody's thoughts on that.
I mean, I think I can delineate between what the administration's image maybe of the golden age of America economy versus what I think the actual potential could be going forward. So I think we're often thinking back to post-World War II America, where there was strong, good middle-class job growth. That being said, in that time period, we had two big factors. First of all, unions were at their highest density ever in America, so a lot of particularly blue-collar jobs or good-paying jobs had good benefits. But then at the same time, where there's a lot of people left behind. And I think if we were thinking more forward-looking, what would a golden age look like? It'd be some of those positives from an earlier era, but not leaving so much talent, productivity, people behind when we move forward.
So I'd say I agree with everything that Kate said, but when we think about the golden age for the American economy, with the policies that we're pursuing under this administration, it's not ahead of us. It's in our rearview mirror. It's getting smaller, and we're speeding away from it. And the reason is because, not because of any technical economic fundamentals, but because of policy choices and policy mistakes. This administration, the president, his staff, Republican members of Congress that are enabling it are rapidly undermining the critical foundations of what makes U.S. economic strength and economic growth. They're gutting scientific research. They're poised to cut spending on education and health investments and human capital, which is really what drives growth in the long term. And somewhat less appreciated is they're undermining the rule of law and replacing it with rule by law, which means that the might is right. And when we do that, it means that the most innovative, most efficient companies are going to lose out. They can't compete in a world where the exercise of power is rewarded, where the businesses that are most willing to be and feed corruption are rewarded, and that closes off economic opportunity and it undermines innovation.
Yes, thank you. So my name is Michael Clemens. I study immigration, so I want to talk about this from the perspective of an immigration economist. And talking about a golden age for the U.S. economy and immigration, demographic change came up from Sharon in the last panel. I'm not sure many Americans are aware that demographic change, demographic decline of the labor force is not some far-off future event. It's happening this afternoon, right now, today. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, with zero immigration to the United States, right now, this year, the labor force would be collapsing by 1 million workers per year. We would be losing permanently 1 million workers net each year with no immigration to the United States. And the White House has explicitly said that it hopes to return to immigration levels of the 1950s and 60s. Things were completely different then. The US labor force was rapidly increasing in the 1950s and 60s from native population growth. We're in a totally different world. As of about 15 years ago, the workforce of America would be shrinking rapidly without immigration, at the same time that our elderly population is going up by 500,000 people per year. A golden age of immigration policy needs much better laws, much better rules, but it's not going back to the 1950s.
I wanted to pick up on that point and talk a little bit about, what role that plays in just the general idea that, the labor force participation rate has bounced between this somewhat narrow range for a few years now, but it's, below the level that many economists would, like to see it, be. You mentioned that, the size of the American labor force is shrinking right now. Why, without immigration, is that happening?
It's due to low fertility in the United States in general, and particularly among natives. There are more people retiring each year than are entering the labor force with no immigration. And given that not all immigrants are labor force participants, some are children, some are elderly, some don't work outside the home, that means we need something like 1.5 million immigrants just to keep the labor force from shrinking. And again, not in some future date, right now. So the immigrants are the lifeblood of economic growth in the economy. And it's not just the jobs that they're doing, and particularly in parts of the country where that demographic decline is especially acute, especially rural areas, Cascade County, Montana, where I grew up, and many others, particular sectors that rest heavily on immigrant labor. But it's the creation of jobs. Take the 500 largest firms in America, the Fortune 500. How many of them were founded by immigrants? 22% of those firms, which grew so much and created so many jobs that they became one of the 500 largest firms in the country, created by immigrants, and another additional separate 24% of those firms created by the children of immigrants. That's what I mean by the lifeblood, and any immigration policy that's going to lead to a golden age needs to be built around robust enforcement of lawful channels for migration that are resting on that demographic and economic reality.
Can I add something to that too? And I think those points are very good also, but I'm also looking a lot at women's labor force participation, where the U.S. is the only advanced economy to have had declining female labor force participation in the past 20 years. All advanced economies have seen a decline in male labor force participation over the last 40 years or so, but women's labor force participation peaked around the year 2000 and has been slowly declining in the U.S. is truly unique in that. There's been recovery since the pandemic, but still not since that 2000 peak. And that, I think, we're still leaving a lot of opportunity on the table by not having a modern labor force protections and benefits system in the US compared to other advanced economies that allow particularly women workers to participate fully in the labor market while also making sure that their family caregiving needs are met. And so I think there's still room there to increase female labor force participation, and we're not be given the opportunity to that. I know the administration is suggesting getting rid of the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor. That would take away the Labor Department's ability to look at those causes. So that is concerning to me. There's definitely no big federal push to increase supports for families to manage caregiving needs right now. And we're starting to see that in the edges of the data. So while overall unemployment is still pretty low, things look pretty good in the data. When I look at measures of labor force underutilization, that has started to creep up a little bit. Those measures of labor force underutilization have gone up about a 0.5 percentage point in the last few months. And so I think we're starting to see that we could be using more of the labor force we do have, and we're missing out on that opportunity.
Gotcha. And when it comes to the labor force being underutilized, does that mean that there's folks who are looking for jobs who can't get them, or folks who are maybe working jobs that are maybe making ends meet, but not necessarily what they could fully be doing to contribute to the economy?
Exactly. So people working part-time who wish they were working full-time, people who aren't able to find jobs that they're good matches with, but maybe without an adequate social safety net, it's hard to switch jobs, and so they're just staying in a bad job. And so I think that is somewhere, if we had a more dynamic labor market, if we gave people a little more stable foundation, we'd have a little bit of potential for growth there.
The immigration guy has something to say about that too, which is Patricia Cortes, who's an economist at Boston University, has shown that U.S. cities that got more immigration in recent decades have higher rates of labor force participation among highly educated women. Mm-hmm. And the mechanism, the principal mechanism, is elder care and child care, yeah. and those are related to the many very important policies you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think on Michael's point, a lot of politicians would like us to believe that there's a zero-sum game in jobs between native-born Americans and immigrant. But the economic research actually shows that where undocumented immigrant population is higher, they actually help create more higher native-born employment and higher wages in that native-born employment. And I think we can also should step back at the macro level and understand that right now the economy is basically at full employment. That means that everyone who wants to have a job has a job. on average, and the productive capacity of the economy is being fully utilized. So if we take these undocumented migrants out of the labor pool, there aren't more people to step in and fill those jobs. It's going to lead to shortages in food services, agricultural production, caregiving work, and construction, where we're hoping, everyone is hoping, that we can find some solutions to the housing affordability crisis, but we're not going to solve that if we don't have people to build homes.
And speaking of the nature of, the idea that, some might see it as like a zero-sum game in between, you have a set number of jobs that you could fill or expand, and, a set number of American, native-born Americans to fill that. A lot of the administration's economic policy has been focused on, the physical, tangible, like, factory town or town factory, where you have generations of people who could rely on this, to, support the community and their families. But the trajectory of the U.S. economy over the past 20 years, for various different reasons, has been more about providing services, and often services abroad. What needs to change about the U.S. economy to make it more supportive of the vision that President Trump has set out? And I guess the second part of that, and Adam, if you want to dive into this, how feasible is it to get to a place where we have big industrial centers in American communities that are really driving the economic vitality of these areas?
It's important that we have a revitalized manufacturing industry in the United States, but no one should be under the illusion that we're going to go back to seeing manufacturing as a share of employment be the way it was, a generation ago. That's just not going to happen. And it's not going to happen because of automation, productivity growth. Even in countries like Germany and China that have had long-term sustained trade surpluses in manufacturing, they see manufacturing employment as a share of employment shrinking. That's not a bad thing. It's happening. It means that the economy is more efficient, more productive, and people can be freed up to do other kinds of work. That said, the jobs that we are creating in manufacturing are increasingly not the good jobs that we used to be, that we imagined them or remember them to be historically. And those jobs historically were good jobs only when we had high union density to be able to bargain for good wages and benefits. Before union density was high, the manufacturing jobs were not good jobs, and increasingly they're not good jobs again. So a starting wage in a non-union manufacturing facility is basically a minimum wage job equivalent to working in fast food service. Until we make all jobs be good quality jobs so people can sustain a good wage and raise a family on, all jobs are going to be at risk.
And to add to that as well, because I know you talked about service jobs in particular, we know that there's been a big sort of trend towards polarization in the economy, the decline of middle-income jobs, which is often attributed to the decline in manufacturing. But the flip side of that coin is also what's happened in the care sector and some of these service sector jobs. What's happened in that sector is we've had a lot of growth in very high-income jobs, so doctors, college professors, things like that. Not that there's been a lot of growth in college professors, but growth in some of those high-income care jobs, and then a lot of growth in the very low-wage care jobs, so home health aides, nurse assistants, childcare workers. We've had a lot of growth there. And we've not had as much of that middle income growth in the care sector. So we have this big growing sector in the economy that is not generating those middle income jobs. And I think that's what we really need to think about is, of course, reinforce a robust manufacturing sector, but what are the other jobs and how do we make those other jobs good jobs? Those are also jobs where we're going to find more women, we're going to find more women of color, and how do we make sure that those are good jobs for those workers where they have upward mobility?
Mm-hmm. And speaking of the various factors that are shaping the labor market, I wanted to ask all three of you about how artificial intelligence and other advancements in AI generally might be impacting it. We've seen quite a few companies announce plans to either make layoffs, and with the idea that they'd be using AI to kind of replace some of the work that had been done. We've seen some folks talk about AI as a productivity enhancer for human workers, for lack of a better phrase. Kate, what do you think the big impact of AI on the job market we've seen so far has been, knowing that obviously there's much to be determined in that field?
What I've seen so far, in particular, looking at the jobs report data and noticing that every single month in the professional and business services sector, women's employment has declined consistently every single month. Men's has gone up and down, but year over year, men's employment has gone up by 134,000 jobs and women's has gone down by 165,000 jobs. So totally divergent in that sector. And I think what we're seeing is these office jobs that were primarily done by women that are now being able to be replaced by AI. And so clerical work, office administration work, customer service work, things like that had been done by women, that generative AI is taking some of that. And I think, anybody who's talked to a customer service bot, like it's very much, the Ashimoglu's idea of the so-so technologies. It's not actually that much better at it, but it is a whole lot cheaper for these companies. And so I think we're seeing some of that impact, particularly on women. But, as you said before, it can also augment workers. And so where we have growing care sector jobs, my ideal situation, my ideal hope would be that it could really augment some of that labor by taking some of the administrative burden and the planning burden in this provision of care services, alleviate that, and then give those care workers time to actually work interactively with the people they're working with. So maybe it's a teacher having support with lesson plans. Maybe it's a team of nurses having support, figuring out a care plan for somebody so they can actually work with the people who are getting care. And so I think there is a big potential, but it is going to take sort of really clear planning and worker engagement to figure out how to do that in a way that sort of both reduces costs for employers, but also make sure we're actually providing good services, not the customer service bots.
Look, I'm waiting for someone to develop the AI that can replace a CEO, because I think that's an area of a lot of inefficiency that could generate great savings for companies. But seriously, I think at least the applications that we see now available in the near future are not the great productivity savers. So we haven't really figured out how to use this technology to enhance productivity. I don't see it replacing a tremendous share of the labor force. There's a research paper out earlier this month, or in May, looking at companies in Denmark that highly adopted the use of AI large language models in their work, and it showed about a 3% increase in productivity. It's not nothing, but it's not huge, not capable of replacing workers. But it's augmenting workers with, as Kate said, a so-so technology. The tools that we have now, I think of akin to a microwave oven. It can speed up things for you. It can do the job of prepping foods more quickly, but it's not really a great, desirable outcome. It's not the same quality that you would want from a real cook.
So the immigration guy speaks again. What would an immigration policy look like that supports and strengthens the AI future that we're definitely headed for? No economist has any idea what the effect of AI in 50 years is going to be, and people pontificate, but we really don't know. We know what's going on now. Silicon Valley and the AI tools that it is rapidly generating runs on lots of things. Among other things, it runs on international students. International students are being systematically and massively excluded from our universities under the policy of this administration. About 20% of the venture capital funded startups in America are immigrant founded, and of those 20%, how did they get to America? Why are they here? 3/4 of those 20% came as foreign students, and that should make us really tremble for our future competitiveness, including in the AI-dominated world, due to current policy. Beyond that, Silicon Valley doesn't just run on foreign students and international talent and software engineers and AI. Silicon Valley runs on childcare. Silicon Valley runs on vegetable pickers. Silicon Valley runs on delivery workers and security workers and construction workers. And all of those things are needed not 50 years from now, they're needed right now. And we have really totally inadequate lawful channels for those people to come and support the AI economy. Because we are laboring under immigration laws that were built 60 years ago by my grandparents' and great-grandparents' generation. They haven't been revised substantially in 35 years, and somehow they're supposed to be apt for this totally different world of demographic change and technological change. We need an immigration policy that fosters entrepreneurship, and that is not an immigration policy that keeps everybody out in the hopes that AI will eliminate all jobs. As you rightly pointed out, it's not going to eliminate all jobs in a timescale that we're talking about.
You know, it feels like we're barely scratching the surface of all these things, but unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our panel. I want to thank the three of you so much for your time and your expertise and insight, and thank you all again for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ireland has a $60 billion surplus. Ireland, why? Because our companies drop their IP there, you know, their patents and their IP, and they pay Ireland the money. Tax scam. How about we end the tax scams, bring the money back, reduce our taxes? Who's our? All of America. Eliminate the tax on tips, tax on overtime, tax on Social Security. Drive down the tax rate of America. Sell green cards. Call them gold cards. Instead of giving away $400,000 a year. Do you realize if we sold those $400,000 a year for $5 million each, you know, that's $2 trillion every time? $2 trillion. We'd have no budget deficit. We could lower taxes on America. These are the thoughts of the guy in the White House. I keep pointing right there because that's where he is. He's right over there. It takes me at least 3.5 minutes to get there. It's amazing the opportunity of America, the greatness of America, with someone like Donald Trump in the White House.
Please welcome Betty Liu back to the stage, along with Danny Werfel, former IRS commissioner.
Thank you so much, Danny, for joining me here on stage, and welcome back, everyone. You just heard Commerce Secretary Lutnick talk about these few ideas already, you know, that have been floated, the gold card, you know, very explicitly calling Ireland a tax scam and saying, you know, companies need to bring their IP back to the U.S. and we need to gain that tax revenue. These are all ideas right now being proposed and floated in the media. What is realistic here?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of key questions that I would have. I mean, a lot of what's been proposed to date, in particular around tariffs, the main emphasis has been let's bring manufacturing, let's bring business back to the United States. It hasn't been necessarily about revenue and closing the deficit. And if you ask the question, how much revenue can we generate from the tariffs? You don't get a good answer right now because there's a lot of uncertainty around where our tariff policy is landing. Even the suggestion about these types of, you know, immigration cards and purchases, you know, understanding how that's going to be implemented over what period of time, what the take-up rate is going to be. So right now, for me, there's a big open question around what would the deficit impact be? And would it offset, for example, the tax cuts that were proposed in the House bill? Is it sufficient? And how long would it take to stand up? And the other key question is implementation. This is something that I feel always gets left behind in the conversation, right? We can have big, bold ideas, and that's good. The question is the government behind those ideas, are they ready to grab the baton and implement them effectively? What kind of structures, people, expertise, technology, what types of risks emerge? What hasn't been talked about enough, I don't think, is if we scale tariffs in a significant way, What are some of the risks of fraud, error, and waste associated with a large-scale tariff program? And have we outlined them? And is there a plan of action to go and make sure that we mitigate those risks? Because typically, when we launch new programs, especially from my experience in the tax and revenue space, we create new industries of scam artists and others that look for ways to exploit while the government is catching up with the risks. And I would worry about that for any new tax program or any new revenue program.
Yeah, these are all extremely important questions. And I imagine if you were still commissioner at the IRS, you would be preparing your teams for, obviously different scenarios on how these scenarios could play out. And yet, you hear the Trump administration say they would like to abolish the IRS and they'd like to take these tariffs and create an external revenue service. What's your view on that?
First of all, I start just kind of with the facts, which is the IRS collects 96% of all the government revenue, north of $4 trillion. Even the most aggressive tariff plan that I think can be conceived, I've seen estimates that it would only get about 40% of the revenue that's generated by the income tax and that's collected by the IRS. So we would be leaving 60% of our revenue on the table, and that would create, obviously, even more skyrocketing deficits and debt. So I don't know how realistic it is. Now, it could be that you could, again, offset these some of the taxes and the revenue through this increase in tariffs, but as of now, we don't really have the vision and the details for what that would look like, how long it would take, and without those details and with the uncertainty right now, it's hard to structure what an IRS transitioning more towards an external revenue collection would be. So I think we need more of a concrete set of specifics and vision and program. That's typically the way this typically plays out is Congress enacts a law and then requires the executive branch to build a strategic plan and a vision and to publish it. And right now, when we're in a space where the executive branch is moving quickly on policies, we don't have that cadence. So I don't know when the vision and the plan and the details will come to light.
Right, and what actually gets implemented. I mean, that's what I'm hearing is, sure, there's bold ideas out there. What actually gets implemented? What are the details of all of this?
Yeah, there's so many different questions and equities and stakeholders. I've just raised how long? What's the sequencing? What is the first wave? And then you can get into what are the skill sets? Is it going to be done in-house? Are we going to outsource it? Mm-hmm. Are there new technologies that are needed? We're in a period right now where the Trump administration and the DOJ are dramatically downsizing the footprint of government and the workforce itself. And so as you're standing up new visions and new programs, can you do it with the workforce that's existing and that's remaining? Are we going to have to hire new? Are we going to outsource? I mean, there's a lot of important implementation questions. They don't get a lot of press. They don't get a lot of attention. I have this vision of the signing ceremony of bills, and then everyone's like, wow, we got that done. But then there's a lot more work that comes behind that.
Yeah.
And I'm always the person that's in the back of the room saying, okay, now that we're rolling up our sleeves, do we have the resources, the tools, the equipment, the risk management to implement this in a way that we serve the mission of the program effectively?
Yeah, it's sort of like we have the what, now how?
Yes.
How do we do this? And I want to get to the workings, to the actual running of the IRS and get your thoughts on that going forward. But before I do, we're sitting here in front of an audience of business leaders and also taxpayers. And given this uncertainty, given you having been in government for so long, and you're so ensconced in the intricacies of how these things work. What is your advice to all of us here? Because if you're uncertain, we're even more uncertain here. What is your advice?
Pay your taxes. It's your civic responsibility. I would also indicate that I don't know if this is advice or just kind of a myth bust, but I would not celebrate a smaller IRS. A smaller IRS does not mean your taxes are lower. The only institute that can, or organization that can change your taxes is up on Capitol Hill. The IRS cannot lower your taxes. What a smaller IRS does is it shifts the burden of paying for our government from those that don't play by the rules to those that do. And that's an inequitable tax system. And every healthy, industrialized nation in the world has, along with it, a healthy tax system. None of them have a popular tax system or tax authority. It's not like we uniquely in America don't like paying taxes. That's true globally. But in order to have a successful, thriving nation and society, you need a healthy tax system. You don't have to like it, but you have to have one. And so I would encourage everyone to think and weigh in, and whether it's at a cocktail party or if you have the opportunity to engage with elected leaders, that eliminating the capacity of the IRS may be politically expedient and popular, but it's not good for every American. It may only be good for those that choose not to play by the rules and not meet their civic responsibility. The other thing, I do want to comment on something that Secretary Lutnick said, which was, he was talking about this thing with Ireland, and it reminded me of the fact that, right now, there are corporations in America that evade their tax responsibility by doing something, it's a technical term, it's called transfer pricing. But what that means is they show the IRS more of their business is going on in another country than actually is, because that other country has a better tax rate. So let's say they're doing $100 of work here in the US, and they don't want to pay the US tax rate, so they'll present that they're actually doing $50 in some other country and $50 here. And therefore, they're giving $50 at a lower tax rate to some other country who doesn't warrant it, because the work and the activity and the income is actually being earned in the US. How do we capture that revenue? Well, you need an IRS workforce. You need investments in subject matter expertise and audit skills. And so it's not just that we're losing money internationally from a policy standpoint. That may be true. I'm not an expert on that. We are losing money internationally because the IRS doesn't have the capacity today to hold companies accountable by making sure that they're presenting all the income that they earned in the U.S. to the U.S. and not shielding it in other jurisdictions.
Right, so enforcement.
Enforcement.
Is what I'm
Again,
hearing.
it's not popular. No one's going to throw a parade for the IRS, and that's okay. I like to say it's in the brochure. But it is important work that ends up being important to the health of our financial situation in the United States.
It's more revenue. It'll end up being more revenue.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Getting to the IRS itself and the running of the agency, not only is the Trump administration advocating for either a smaller agency or abolishing it altogether, it's been leadership change after leadership change since you resigned. So we've had 5 acting commissioners. Billy Long, it looks to be likely to be the 6th and permanent commissioner under this second Trump administration. But I imagine, anyone here who, we're all part of, we've all led organizations, leading organizations, having 5 leaders in 6 months is extremely disruptive. And it's hard to run an organization, with that kind of change. So what are going to be the second order impacts of this kind of, impermanence right now?
Well, again, if you go back, that's why I thought it was so important to establish the premise that a well-functioning IRS may not be popular, but it's important. And it will mean not only a fair tax system, it'll mean that if you have an issue, that you'll get through to the IRS. Someone will answer your phone call. Because with decreased capacity, there is a higher opportunity for mistakes to be made. That mistake could hit you. You could get a letter that you shouldn't have gotten. You may have paid a tax and it didn't register correctly, and now you still owe and you have a question, so you want to get in touch with someone and get it fixed, and they're not there to answer the phone. So as long as we continue to have taxes and a complex tax code, you need a well-functioning IRS. And everyone in this room knows, and this is not rocket science, that a well-functioning organization, there are some preconditions to that. One of them is stable leadership at the top, a vision, a set of priorities. You need your workforce to feel both physically safe and psychologically safe. You need the workforce to feel, you need to retain and attract talent. You have to have the right skill sets. And right now, I worry that we're in the period of transition is so challenging. We haven't had stable leadership. We have an exodus of a lot of senior leadership, institutional knowledge. We have thousands of people that were laid off in the last few months. And my question is, what is the plan and the vision for how we get to a well-functioning IRS? You know, when I was confirmed to be IRS commissioner back in March of 2023, we had just published a 250-page plan outlining the vision for what we were going to do under the Inflation Reduction Act. And that plan went through painstaking detail of what are the big moving pieces, and within those, what are the sequencing, and what are the performance indicators, and what are the milestones. And the big criticism of that plan from the Republicans at the time was not enough detail. I read this plan, this 200-page plan, and I still don't have enough detail on what you're going to do to modernize the IRS. And I was like, I welcome that criticism. Yeah, let's get more detail. I get it. Right now, we don't have any plan. We don't have not just a 200-page plan, I don't think we have a 2-page plan in terms of, with all of these changes and the cycling out of people and this amazing amount of turbulence that's going on, where is this headed? And I feel like I could comment on it and maybe even support some of it if I knew what we were building towards, but we don't have that yet.
Well, that's a great closer here, so to speak here, Danny, which is, out of all that you've heard so far, what could you support? What would you support?
Absolutely more modernized, more automation, more AI. There are a lot of things that the IRS does today that can be automated, and there's a lot that can't. And I personally pitched this to the transition team when they arrived after the election. I said, if your ambition is a smaller IRS in terms of workforce, there are opportunities to automate and roboticize, if you will, IRS operations. But before you get there, keep the staff, because the operations need to keep working. The assembly line needs to keep moving through.
Yeah.
So automate, downsize in segments. And we had a plan to do that. And I think the criticism, which is fair, is that we were too incremental. We weren't being bold enough and quick enough. And so my attitude was, if you can do it quicker, great. If there are ways that we haven't seen on how to accelerate or be even more ambitious with our 200-page automation plan, please, have at it. And but again, what is the plan? What is the sequencing? What are the priorities? And we urge them not to downsize until that automation was up and running, tested, and working well. That hasn't happened, and that, I think, creates risk that the operational capacity of the IRS will be diminished. And again, while not popular, it's not good for America.
Well, on that note, Danny, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
It is now time to hear from one of our presenting sponsors, PMI US. Please turn your attention to the screens.
It's one thing to do business in the U.S. It's another to be invested in its future. A future that can be thoughtful, prosperous, and smoke-free. That's why PMI and its family of companies are ready to tackle the #1 cause of preventable death in America. We're leading a sweeping historic movement, one that's accelerating smoke-free progress. We don't sell traditional cigarettes in the U.S. Instead, we're innovating with purpose to offer adult smokers science-backed, smoke-free nicotine products like Zyn and IQOS. We're creating thousands of direct and indirect jobs across the country. We're training workers for tomorrow and investing in the heartland, where innovation can lift entire towns and cities. We're driving real change in real time for the benefit of public health, local economies, and the communities that power us. We're committed to ensuring our products are for adults 21 and over with responsible marketing practices that help prevent youth appeal. We give where we live and then expand from there. By supporting military veterans and their families, funding disaster relief, and local entrepreneurship, we're helping to bring about a bold new chapter in ingenuity and prosperity. Together, as we continue to build a smoke-free future, we'll continue to invest in the people in America, the opportunity in America, because we're proud to be invested in America.
Now, please welcome Stacey Kennedy, President of the Americas region and CEO of PMI US, in conversation with Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science at Decision Desk HQ.
Well, thanks for joining us here today. I was excited when they asked me. I run a team full of election data engineers, and they run on Zinpacks, so they want to say hi. Tell us a little bit about yourself and CEO of PMI, and just, what does Invest in America mean to you?
Well, thanks, Scott. Look, I'm delighted to be here today. And I'm delighted to be in America, because I think not only myself, but our entire company is really optimistic about the future of America, about American resilience. And our belief is deeply rooted in American values and the belief of the American dream. So for me, invested in America really means showing up in America for Americans. And that has to start with literally showing up. So PMI is a company, New York Stock Exchange, publicly traded American company that did business for a decade and a half in the rest of the world, but didn't sell our products in the United States of America. We invested billions to solve the problem of smoking by developing science-backed, FDA-authorized products that smokers, particularly the 30 million American smokers now that we're focused on, have better choices. So with our decision about 3 years ago to enter the US market, for me, that was a huge moment, because it literally meant showing up for Americans. And many say, well, okay, I'm not a smoker, or no one in my family is a smoker, so this topic isn't really that relevant for me. I will tell you why every American should care about this topic. Smoking cigarettes remains the #1 cause of preventable death in the United States of America. That takes a tremendous human toll, and it takes a tremendous economic toll on taxpayers who are bearing the burden of the cost of smoking-related disease. It's terrible all the way around, and it's preventable. And so invested in America for us looks like showing up with our powerful mission and purpose to improve public health, giving Americans what they want, which is a choice in products, better products that are science-backed, FDA-authorized, by making a positive economic impact. We're about value creation through jobs, through the hundreds of thousands of retailers that sell our products, and about avoiding economic value destruction. And we do that through creating jobs. So I'm really excited about our manufacturing projects. We're completely committed to manufacturing all of our consumables in America. And we're also really focused on making sure that we're a good neighbor and we give back to the communities where our employees live and work and where our consumers live and work. So that's what Invested in America is about to us.
What are some of the challenges? What keeps you up as night as you bring about that vision? What are the problems?
Well, so one of the things that keeps me up at night is I think that the problem is misunderstood. There's an enormous amount of misinformation about what causes smoking-related disease and death. Not enough Americans understand that nicotine is not the problem. It's not the primary cause of smoking-related disease. It's not a carcinogen. But the harmful chemicals in smoke from a cigarette is what causes the disease and death. And many in the health professional community don't fully understand what is the cause and what is not. And most Americans don't know the solution. So getting out that word and making sure that everybody cares about this problem is preventable, that smokers can be satisfied by better products and avoid the significant risk associated with the smoke.
Makes sense. Well, anything else we should know about Invest in America, what you guys are diving into or anything like that?
I think there's some interesting, we recently did a study to understand what Americans believe about corporate America. It's a pretty important topic. And so many of the things we learned through this study really rang true for me. The American public believes that corporations and corporate executives should show up in a real and authentic human way and care about solving the problems that this nation faces. In fact, 84% of Americans believe that corporations have an ethical responsibility to do good in the communities where they live and work. And so that led us, when I first arrived back in the US, launching our business here, on a listening tour to listen to different groups of Americans, veterans, first responders, community leaders, to understand what they had to say about their expectations of what a good corporate citizen and a responsible corporate executive is. And so we've taken that to heart. Americans want less pining and more action. And so we're doing that in the places where we have our factories, where our consumers live and work, by making financial investment, but also rolling up our sleeves and making sure that our employees contribute in the community.
You guys really are nationwide. Headquarters in Stanford, you grew up in Mississippi, so that's really a national vision?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hope to bring this to every American. It takes time, but we're really putting all of our resources and a lot of employee passion around our purpose into this.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Insightful.
The American dream is rooted in the concept that any citizen can achieve prosperity, upward mobility, and economic security. For too long, the designers of multilateral trade deals have lost sight of this. International economic relations that do not work for the American people must be re-examined. This is what tariffs are designed to address. Leveling the playing field such that the international trading system begins to reward ingenuity, security, rule of law, and stability, not wage suppression, currency manipulation, intellectual property theft, non-tariff barriers, and draconian regulations. To the extent that another country's practices harm our own economy and people, the United States will respond. This is the America First trade policy.
Please welcome Betty back to the stage, joined in conversation by Nicole Elam, CEO of National Bankers Association.
Nicole, thank you so much for joining me here. We've heard quite a bit and seen, as Treasury Secretary Bessent just noted about leveling the playing field. There's lots of proposals out there to deregulate, and for the banking industry, certainly seems like the Trump administration is going to be a bit friendlier than the prior administration. And yet you, advocating for and representing minority banks, have also faced policy initiatives that have aggressively pushed back on DEI. And those are challenges that that many of your members are facing. So how do you navigate both of those, where you've got, on the one hand, friendlier, perhaps, banking regulation from the administration, but at the same time, real aggressiveness here on eradicating DEI?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that it's not new navigating the difference between a Republican and a Democratic administration. Typically, when Republicans come in, there is less regulation. That is something that is known. What is a little bit more interesting that we're having to navigate is the about face as it relates to DEI. Over the last 5 years, minority-owned and operated banks, much like a lot of mission-driven banks, have grown explosively in this post-pandemic, post-George Floyd environment. As a matter of fact, they grew by 58%, and black banks in particular grew by 79% in asset size. And a lot of that was driven by the prior administration. It actually started under the Trump administration, and as well as corporate America investing heavily in mission-driven banks, because they knew that if you invest in these banks, then the communities that were the hardest hit by the pandemic would bounce back. And so it's an about face when you had an administration that was pumping a lot of resources to now everybody being scared and pulling away. And so you expected the DEI kind of to turn, but the way, the velocity, the pace, the speed at which it happened was interesting. And that's the biggest thing that we're having to navigate. The good news is that the banks are well capitalized. So when there is an economic downturn, they can support themselves and the communities that they serve.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, but that's the biggest thing that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
The thing that helped them grow is now the thing that they're being attacked for.
So how do you keep that momentum? How do you help the banks keep that momentum in the face of potentially fewer and fewer resources?
I think they stay focused on what they've always done, which is that serving the communities that we've always been here to serve. I'm also trying to get them to focus on a lot of the big things that are happening right now and how they can take advantage of AI and innovation, and how do they stay on the curve. Because if you're a small bank, your maybe average asset size is under $1 billion. Most of my members' average asset size is $460 million. So how do you keep pace with how technology is changing everything when big banks are spending $17, $18 billion a year on technology? So that's the biggest thing that I'm helping them focus on. How do they take advantage of, and how do they partner with fintechs so they can keep pace with how the financial services landscape is changing?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up technology, because that's been a big theme in the conversations today, particularly AI, leveraging AI, the benefits and the disruptions. Banks, no different, looking at not only AI, but also the cryptocurrencies, digital assets. How do they make sure that they play in that game as well? How do you make sure that minority banks lead in this area and not lag?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest things that we're trying to help them focus on is fintech partnerships. We spend a lot of time talking about how AI can help with innovation and automation and efficiency, but I think one of the things that we miss is how AI can help you understand people better. And if you understand people better, you can serve them better, you can bank them better, you can help them invest better. And so one of the things we've been spending a lot of time talking about is fintech partnerships, and how they can leverage fintech partnerships to better reach the customers that they're serving more. Embedded finance is something that is completely changing the landscape. The fact that I now have access to financial services on non-banking platforms. I'm shopping, and now all of a sudden I can buy now, pay later. I'm doing my accounting services, and now all of a sudden I have access to loans. These things are completely changing the way that people bank. Another thing is just how collaborative the ecosystem is becoming. The fact that my banks are partnering with data platforms, they're partnering with fintechs, they're partnering with community organizations to better meet people where they are, and leveraging AI to offer hyper-personalized services. I think one of the great things about community banks, small banks, is that they are able to say yes when people say no, because they know that person. They are using alternative sources of data. So how do we help them become high-tech and high-touch? I think that's their differentiator that can help them get further faster.
Yeah, and you mentioned fintech partnerships. What have you seen to be most effective? Like, what types of partnerships are effective? are really generating that kind of momentum?
I think one of the biggest things is how affordable they are. If I can't leverage it, if I can't access it because it's too expensive, it's not helpful to me or the communities that I serve. So affordability is a huge thing. I think another thing that we would love to have is more clarity. I think we need more clarity as it relates to fintech partnerships, more clarity in the AI space, more clarity with cryptocurrency, more clarity with digital assets, because when there's a lack of clarity, people pull back and get scared, particularly small banks who can't absorb the cost of the regulatory oversight. And so I think one of the things we hear is mixed messaging. We hear a lot about, we want this, we like this from our regulators, but when it comes time to actually doing it, the environment of oversight is unclear, and so that allows people to push back. It causes them to pull back. So I think we just need more regulatory clarity in that space. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm curious to hear, outside of clarity, or maybe if you want to dig in a little bit more to that clarity, what do you need from Washington? What do you need from Congress?
Clarity and right sizing. I think we need clarity as it relates to technology adoption. You have a number of small banks who want to get in that space, but again, the guideposts are a little unclear, and so nobody wants to get in that space. And then you hear too often where a fintech is in the news, and then all of a sudden the regulator is calling you about the fintech that was in the news that you have a partner with. That has nothing to do with the safety and soundness of what you're doing. And so that's something that is scary. I think another thing that we need is clarity around, again, digital assets. It's a space that people want to play in, but there's not a lot of clarity around it. We need right-sized regulations. Small banks cannot absorb the compliance cost. And so it's much different if I am a $3 trillion company versus a $300 million bank. How do you navigate all of those things? So right-sizing regulations so that they are taking into consideration who you're serving, I think is important. We also know what the 6 big factors are that predict bank failures. So why are we not focused on regulations that are targeted towards that? So I think right-sizing regulations and clarity as it relates to AI, cryptocurrency, digital assets would all be good things that we need from Washington.
I want to flip it a little bit to the viewpoint of the consumer, of the customer, the banking customer. Public trust of large institutions, but the system in general has been eroding, among the public for many, many years. And the pandemic didn't help. The public mistrust grew even more after that. And a lot of that ire is directed at the financial system and at the banks. So you, representing minority banks, how do you rebuild that trust, or how do you build that trust with your communities?
I trust people that I know. And I think one of the great things about our banks is that they are in those communities. They are sitting there and serving them every single day. They're saying yes when others are saying no. They're the reason why people in urban, rural, and tribal areas are able to build businesses, buy homes, and save for their future, because they are there. And so I think that makes the difference, that they're in the communities. One of the biggest things, though, that when I think about consumers, I think about risk. And some of the biggest trends that I'm seeing in the financial services space has to do with risk, and a lot of that risk is impacting consumers. Take, for example, cybersecurity, right? Cybersecurity is rapidly evolving, and criminals are using AI to be more effective and efficient. So fraud is increasing. This year alone, we expect by 2025 that cybercrime losses are going to total $10.5 trillion. That impacts consumers, and that impacts their trust. So cybersecurity is a huge thing. The second big thing is underwriting, right? Underwriting is no longer keeping pace with how workers are earning money. You've got the gig economy. You've got influencers who are making far more than I'm making, creating content. But I can't underwrite a loan based upon that. That leads to mistrust. And so there's underwriting gaps. And then we talked a little bit about the regulatory gaps. Whenever something happens with innovation, people blame the bank, but the bank wasn't to blame. It was something else. And so all of those things lead to mistrust, but there's risk underlining a lot of that.
And this is kind of a general question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, which is, what do banks, and perhaps this is more from the viewpoint of what do minority banks still get wrong about customers?
I don't know that it's that they get it wrong. I think that they don't have the resources to meet them where they are. One of the reasons why community banks are able to say yes when other banks are saying no is that they have always relied on alternative data to underwrite those loans. I know that you may live in a place that has been the victim of redlining. So I'm not going to use that to underwrite the mortgage. I'm going to use that other cash-based flow analysis. And so they've always done that. What they're unable to do is do it at scale. And you need technology to do it at scale. And why can't I do it at scale? Because technology is expensive. So it's a catch-22. It's not that they don't know how to do it, because they've been doing it with nothing. It's that they don't have the scale that they need to do it better.
Got it. Before we go, Nicole, I asked a few guests this question, but taking a look at the landscape over the next, let's say, 10, 20 years, when you look at the minority banking landscape, what do you see?
A bright future. What we need is that the federal government and corporations continue to invest in them. I think people are running away from and retreating, and there's this thought that we don't need community banks. You know, big banks, fintechs, others will fill that gap, and that's not true. We've got over a century of data that shows that that is not true. They continue to be the gap fillers. They continue to be the first line and the last line of defense for so many communities that are underserved. And underserved doesn't necessarily mean poor, right? There are a lot of reasons why people are underserved by traditional banking models. And the traditional banking model is changing. The way that people are banking is rapidly changing. And so I think the future is bright, but what we need is for our partners to continue to remain.
Always a place for smaller banks.
Always a place for small banks.
Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciated this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Please welcome to the stage Josh Araujo, CEO of Forterra.
So Josh, thank you so much for joining us. And we're the closing interview here for the
Yes, it's not lost on me that I'm standing between you and lunch, so try to make this interesting.
Well, and it will be, because fascinating what you've done with the company. And I know you were elevated to CEO at Forterra. You've led the organization both under the Biden administration and now the Trump administration. And I'm curious, just to start off, any differences between the two and how that's changed your job?
Yeah, not surprisingly, yes, a lot of differences. I think it would be helpful to give some context of what we do. So we deploy, really our mission as a company is to deploy the most capable technology at the lowest possible cost, at the fastest possible speed, at the best relevant mission alignment to our men and women overseas and serving our country. If you look at the DNA of our company, I served in the Marine Corps for 10 years. It was probably the least tenured, least deployment of all the veterans at the company, but our founder, who started the company 20 years ago, did so for this exact same mission. And I think if you look at how DoD and the Department of Defense is set up over time to acquire technologies, it's really been to really create the opposite outcomes. The most expensive technology built over the longest period of time that is probably irrelevant by the time it hits the field. And the way that industry has been set up over time has been really counter to that mission. So we are fortunate to be among the companies that are trying to break down those barriers. I think if you look at the evolution of this space over the last 10 years, venture-backed defense tech was not a thing. And I will tell you, nothing makes me more excited that there are venture capitalists that are investing their own money at risk to develop technology for the warfighter at a pretty broad-based level. So I'd say that the administration change, we're seeing a lot more adoption of commercial technology acquisition pathways that look a lot different than how your traditional jet or tank or something else has been acquired. And I think that's been encouraging to see. And I think that's very bipartisan. I think this has been talked about a lot of times, but when there's a lot of broad-based change happening, this seems to be a catalyst for the acceleration of technology to the people that matter. So that's what's exciting.
So it sounds like more optimistic?
I'd say less optimistic when I look at the global geopolitical situation. And I think that this change is born out of necessity, which is an unfortunate thing. But I think optimistic that there is the investor base, both in Silicon Valley and really across the country. We're seeing really this investment coming in from a lot of different places, and a pretty wide swath of really talented people trying to solve really important problems that span a wide range of problem sets for the warfighter. So, and then what you see is really a continuation as things change. It's an opportunity to pull changes forward as well. So, I think net, it's something that, for better or for worse, it's something we have to do as a country.
Yeah, it's creating that demand, essentially. And you mentioned defense tech and how there's been increasing interest from the venture world on various different industries than before, and defense tech is one of them that's really emerged. And I know you raised capital, or you closed your Series B, I believe, in September of last year.
Yep, that's right.
I'm curious if you were trying to close it today, do you think you'd be facing a different environment than when you closed it back in September?
Yeah, I think it's this trend in defense tech investment and this, intense interest in investing in, national security in the industrial base has been, it's been several years in the making, and it's really definitely hitting a peak. If you look at the investment happening into defense tech, don't quote me on the number, but there's a group, Silicon Valley Defense Group, that measures this thing, and it's about $50 billion a year of investment just into defense tech companies.
Wow.
That's about half the market cap of one of your large primes of cash going into investment every single year. I think when you look at the flip side of that, about $6 billion of the current defense budget is being spent on products from those companies out of a $800 billion, probably close to $1 trillion defense budget. And so I think the challenges that a lot of the industry is going to face here is that you have to have a customer on the other side that's willing to transact, dollars in exchange for goods and services, and knowing that you have a customer that's going to transact if you show up with a product that the warfighter needs. And so that's a lot of work that needs to happen on the Hill in legislation, a lot of work that needs to happen in how the Department of Defense does acquisitions and how they prioritize commercial procurements. But the longer term concern is that if that trend doesn't emerge, because there is definitely great technologies out there that should be deployed, it's a lot of the administrative, bureaucratic, regulatory issues that are preventing that from happening. If that doesn't flip in a real way, my concern is you're going to see this pullback of investment into that space, and it's a really encouraging time. So I hope that doesn't happen.
Would you say that's your top risk when you think about working with the DoD?
Yeah, I think it's a top risk. It's a unique customer in that the person that uses, like when I go to, let's say I want to buy a phone, I'm going to do my own market research. I'm going to go look at the phones. I'm going to try them out at Best Buy or look at my friend's phone. I'm going to budget my own. I'm going to pull it out of my bank account. I'm going to buy it, and then I'm going to use that phone. And if I don't like it, I'm going to return it. And in DoD, the individuals that are using that product don't actually have a say of whether or not they have to use it. They're issued it. It's issued. The people that are budgeting and funding it aren't even the people that are going to use it, and aren't even the people that are making the buying decisions. So Congress is appropriating and authorizing money. But then there's a separate group that is running the purchasing decision that is independent of the other two groups. So you actually have this three-pronged sales approach. So you have to line up all these things perfectly at the right timelines with all the right regulation. So it's a very challenging customer to sell to, but it is also a very informed customer. It's a great customer if you can align those missions. And so I think the challenge there is manyfold, but the outcome and the impact on national security, and really for us, it's we essentially develop technology that takes those men and women out of harm's way. And so for every piece of technology we can deploy that's an 18 or 19 or 20-year-old that's not inside of that vehicle or not forward deployed, and I have a first cousin that is an armored vehicle crewman in the Marine Corps right now, and I text him all the time saying, hey man, we're working on it. We are trying to get this out to you as fast as possible. But I think you have to have that alignment on the mission and really the alignment on the impact, because the challenges and the day-to-day brain damage trying to sell to a very complicated but worthwhile customer is worth it.
Yeah, it sounds like a very complicated sales process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Once you get that done.
Once you get it done, you tend to be a sticky customer, and you see this with the traditional incumbents. They have been customers of the government for decades and decades, whether the product works or not, or whether the government's happy with them or not. They're typically stuck. And I think the trend, if you look at it at a high level, what's happening with this defense tech private investment is that there is a mindset of the way we look at it is we sell an outcome. We're not selling a widget. We're not selling a gadget. We're not selling you something that, and I saw this on the back end, I'm old enough now, it's sad to say, that my first deployment, this was in 2003, there was no technology. There was like night vision goggles and old radios from the 80s. But when you saw this technology starting to get inserted, it rarely ever worked. It was not really relevant. You show up in a big box, no instruction manual, you weren't trained on it. it broke the first time you used it, and it went in, went off to the side. And I'm sure there's somebody in the government pissed off of that contractor who built that thing, but they made a lot of money and they checked all the boxes, and it went on, and now it's probably sitting, in some burn pit somewhere. And I think the transition now is like, we're really selling capabilities. Like, if we deliver what we say we're going to deliver and it's useful, then pay us, and pay us on a recurring basis, and it's going to be cheaper than you trying to do this any other way. And if we don't, well, we took the risk. We took on that outside capital. We made our bet. I mean, I've bet now the last 5 years of my life that this is worthwhile. And if it doesn't pan out, then we'll eat the risk. But I think there has to be a normal economic risk trade-off between sellers to the government and the government that's buying that technology. And I think that's really happening now. We're seeing this with the administration change, but this really happened prior to the administration change. It's just continuing.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and outside of working with the DoD and de-risking some of those challenges you just mentioned, what's the next biggest challenge? What's on your mind?
As a company, or I can think of a lot, yeah.
Yes.
No, I think it's really how do you, so once you start selling to that customer, again, that user of that technology is that 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old specialist lance corporal that's going to have a constantly evolving and changing mission set. And maybe that technology they developed a month ago or 2 weeks ago or 2 years ago that they're using may not be perfectly suited. And so the next challenge is, well, and we see this almost daily as we're in there close to them, working with them daily, is like, well, what other things are you saying? Because, I mean, that's really what we're obsessed with is how do we make their lives easier, safer, more effective? And then how do we go leverage our engineering talent, investors to pull in more investment to develop those products or solutions or software to make that immediate impact? And how do we shorten that cycle from, corporal, in the Ranger Regiment has an issue. How do we get that solution to him as fast as possible, at the lowest possible cost, at the least amount of friction that's immediately relevant? There's a lot of things that need to go into that. It's capital raising, it's hiring, it's product roadmaps, it's testing and validation, and then it's acceptance testing and delivery. And so really that's again, I think the biggest challenge. My biggest challenge is what is their biggest challenge, and how do we solve that in a relevant way?
How do you put all the pieces in place? Let's just step back for a moment, because AI has come up pretty much repeatedly in all of these, in all of the panels this morning. And I'm curious, how you are leveraging AI in your business, and sort of and I think particularly for you as a CEO, what would you like to see in terms of, or not only what would you like to see, but what are the risks between what again, all these different stakeholders here in Washington, how they're going to regulate AI? And what do you want to see and what don't you want to see?
Yeah, I think so. So we're an AI company. We do self-driving, fully autonomous vehicles. And so you think like, hey, we've been doing AI. Our founder was teaching AI and neural networks and machine learning 25 years ago. I'll tell you, if anybody says that they figured out how to best optimize that, I think they're up here saying, selling you, I get a bridge, I'll sell you. But I think it really comes down to, for us, we obviously use it in our product. It's the thing that we help, it's the foundational part of our product. But then we're seeing this with the LLMs and generative AI, is ways to develop your product or make your product better, faster, more efficiently, across the business, engineering, back office accounting functions. Really, there's you can sit around and think about a million ways you can use AI. I think the risk is that, well, it's twofold. One, you don't figure out how to use it well enough, and you get outpaced by either your productivity is not competitive or your pricing isn't competitive. I think the other risk is adoption inside of organizations. If employees feel like, well, if I adopt this tool, does this mean that you're going to need fewer of us, and we're just going to, and so it's that internal adoption and uptake. And we look at the same way with our actual product is, this isn't replacing a human. It's making the humans that are doing something dangerous or dull or dirty more effective with this AI technology to go do whatever mission they need to do. And it's having that same mindset internally with employees, is that, like, this isn't replacing you. Like, you're valued. We spend a lot of time recruiting you, hiring you, onboarding you, getting you plugged into all the context of how we operate as a company. Well, now there's this new tool that's going to allow you to be more effective, because I guarantee if you pull anybody or a company, nobody's going to say that they're underworked and overpaid. And I think AI, if they can look at it as a way, well, wait a second, if I can, this task that would have taken me 2 hours to do manually, that if I can pull in a generative AI to knock it out real quick, I can go have dinner with my family, make home to have dinner with my family, or I can get this research project going on whatever LLM tool is going to do this upfront research that's really kind of boring, but then I can really pour through and do the detailed thought. Because I think what we found is that you're never going to replace that highly skilled, thoughtful human with all of the context of an organization is never going to be replaced. And I've seen tools come around, they can scrape all your data and everything else, and trust me, I try it all the time. It always has a critical failure point that requires more time for you to go in and fix than it would have been just do it yourself. Yeah. And so I think if you can make sure the employees are viewed as an empowerment tool that's going to help them be more productive, more effective, buy back time in their personal life, maybe get a raise because they're doing 10x the amount of output. I think that's how do you de-risk the adoption of an organization. And then I think it's up to the company leadership and the management team to think, how strategically can we deploy this in a way that makes sense and gets everybody comfortable along the way.
And just as a final question, and to put you on the spot here, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but really quickly, Josh, being that you are in this technology so much, I know it's more on the B2B side, less on the consumer side. But what about AI, do you think in 12 months, will we see an AI that we're not today?
Oh man, you were asking a mechanical engineer, a software AI problem. Yeah, I mean, look, I think you're starting to see it. When the first ChatGPT version came out, I was like, oh, you can ask a bunch of questions, it'll do a lot of great things. I think it's really a lot more agent-based, so having multiple agents doing a lot of complex tasks. And I think if you look at, what's a good example we're doing internally is, hey, help me write software. It's pretty good at writing software. It's like 80% good. But then if you can have another agent check the software was written by the other agent and suggest edits that you can then, it's really how do you maximize the cognitive abilities that only a human is going to have to focus on just those decisions that matter, and how do you leverage different AI schema to surface that the most efficient manner. And so, look, it's hard for me to say I didn't see this coming 3 years ago. And probably weekly with these updates, I don't. But I think for us, it's like, look, one foot in front of the other, one day at a time. Most effectively, how do we, again, it comes back to, for us, in our case, we are singularly focused on what does that 18, 19, 20-year-old need out in the field. And then my biggest concern is how do we line up all these things that are going to deliver that technology at the right point in time.
Yep.
And this is just one tool in our toolkit that can help achieve that mission. And I think if companies or people keep that mindset, is how do we keep this aligned on the mission and empowering people to do that better and more efficiently. Look, your guess is as good as mine. So yeah, you did put me on the spot.
But I think that sounds like that's what we're evolving to. So more and more sophistication there. Josh, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Joining me here on stage. Thank you.
Thanks.
And that wraps up the Invest in America conference here. So thank you to everyone for asking me to host the interviews today, and thank you also to all of our speakers and other moderators. On behalf of the Hill and our presenting sponsors, so just bear with me, I have a couple of more things before lunch to say here. American Property Owners Alliance, BCG, Philip Morris International US, and our participating sponsors, Decision Desk HQ, as well as Consumer Bankers Association, who's providing lunch today. So it's a grab-and-go lunch, so make sure you stop by on your way out. Also like to thank everyone who's been with us live streaming and joining online. And if you missed any of the presentations today, all the event videos are online at thehill.com. So that wraps it up for me. My job is done. Thank you so much for staying here with me all through this morning. Thank you.